recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
Okay, welcome everyone to the meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. Just to remind everyone to put yourselves on mute if you're not speaking. And we'll start off by reminding everyone that we'll take both written and oral public comments. And please email your public comments and questions to the email on the screen. That's disb@deltacouncil.da.gov. And for oral comments, either use the raise hand Zoom function or send us an email. And then once you've been, for the oral comments, once you've been recognized, please state your name and affiliation and give us up to a 3-minute public comment. We'll move ahead with a roll call. And when I call the board member's name, just give us your full name and whether or not you have any new declarations. Steve Brandt, no new declarations. Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
Tom?
Tom Holzer, no new declarations.
Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Jay?
Hey Lund, no new declarations.
And Joe?
Joe Fernando, no new declarations.
Okay, Diane McKnight is, I believe she's at a scientific meeting and sends her apologies. Virginia?
Virginia Dale, no new declarations.
I'm sorry, I was going by the people on the screen and every once in a while you just kind of all shift order. So it was, anyway. Well, thanks everyone. I'll move directly into the chair report. And Edmund, I don't believe we have any general correspondence to report.
We don't have any general correspondence for this item.
Okay, thanks. The Delta ISB, Tanya and Joe and I think Virginia was there too, presented the monitoring enterprise review formally to the Stewardship Council on April 28th, and hope to present, or will, I guess now, present those results to the DPIC on their July 18th meeting. And we've asked the council to respond to those and to those recommendations. And anyone from the board have any comments about their sense of how the meeting went?
Steve, just as a help, I think Tom Holzer was also missed in the roll call. Was he? No. Okay, sorry.
No, he got him.
My mistake. It is harder than it looks.
I got to go by the list of names, I guess, rather than the videos. The second item is the Delta ISB will present the water supply reliability review to the council on their June 23rd meeting. And I think we'll hear more about that later in the day. And now the most important item is that my chairship expires at midnight on August 31st. And and Lisa will take over as 2 years as chair, and I move into the coveted position of past chair. But we need to elect a new chair-elect, and we want to do this hopefully by June. So, you know, the chairship is a critically, obviously, the important part of how the board operates, and we know it's a major responsibility to take on that that responsibility. The way it works is you would be elected as chair-elect and serve as part of the leadership team, or chairship as we call it, for a period of 2 years before you step into the chair for 2 years, and then step into the past chair for 2 years. And we are looking for volunteers who would like to be nominated. We have for those nominations, we have a formal election process, and that person's responsibility as chair-elect would begin on September 1st. This is really important, so I really want to, if anyone would like to volunteer now to put their hat into the ring, they're more than welcome to do that. They can talk to myself or Lisa or Jay in terms of asking questions about those responsibilities and how much time it takes. I think Lisa would agree. It probably only takes about an hour a month, to do this. So I am kind of joking, but it is an important part of this. Part of the chair. We don't have a chair elect. We're in deep trouble. So really think hard about this and see if you can offer the time to put into this. And we want to have that election in June. So any questions about that? Okay. We will have a new board member, Jay Obasekara, I believe, starts on June 1st. So he will be joining us at our face-to-face meeting in June, I believe. And that's the first time in a more than a year where we will be back to our full complement of 10 individuals. So we welcome him on June 1st. The meeting today, that's all I have for the board's chair's report. The meeting today is going to be very busy. We have a lot of things to talk about. We'll have presentations by the council and by the science program lead, talk about our outreach for past reviews, talk about our future reviews, discuss our next steps in the science needs assessment. We're also planning to look at a draft response to the Hastings report and see if we can get to the stage where we can formally vote on and approve that response. And then preparation for upcoming meetings. This one's a little bit more extensive than in the past because during that preparation for upcoming meetings, we are going to be talking specifically about preparing for the EIR review that we've been asked to do and trying to get ahead of the game. We're expecting a June presentation on that, but we want to talk about today about how we might get prepared for that and look at chapters and think about our getting prepared for that major review. I think that's all I have from our report. Are there any questions from board members or comments? Any public comments, Edmund?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation if applicable.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And the California Senate is proposing to appropriate $100 million to improve water management science and agency coordination, including funding to improve scientific evaluation and information sharing between the State Water Resources Control Board, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Water Commission, the Delta Independent Science Board, and the Department of Water Resources. And there will also be funding to the Water Board, Fish and Wildlife, and the Water Control Boards for program implementation and to establish a statewide environmental water master program. This is a rather staggering amount of funding, and my concern for the Delta Independent Science Board is that the tunnel EIR is rumored to be 15,000 pages, and you're still getting up to speed. We would very much welcome an expanded oversight role for the Delta Independent Science Board in agency science and and expanded funding for water management science, which I think is critically important for climate change. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. We're trying to find out more about it. I do remember that Bob Lyman talked about a review manager and potentially having, and the board discussed when there were, funding issues for the board's members' work. So I don't know, and I wouldn't attempt to make, you are the best experts, and I hope we're encouraging the Senate to reach out to the board leadership and to the Delta Stewardship Council and Science Program to discuss, you know, the needs. But one observer commented, we think sometimes the Senate seems to think that science gets done with money instead of scientists, and that they've had increased workload without increased personnel. And I thought that was particularly important. So thank you very much. We'll be tracking this going forward and trying to give you information as we can.
Thanks, Deidre, on that. It's maybe we can ask the council's legislative affairs person to keep track of that legislation and budgeting and anything else that directly names the Delta Independent Science Board or increases our responsibility. It's important for us to know that as early in the game so we can plan for it. Thanks. Any other public comments?
There are none.
Okay, move on to item number 3, which is the Delta Stewardship Council Chair Report. And I know there's a number of people that will be reporting, but the first one is by Virginia Madueño, who's the current acting chair.
Well, good morning and hello again. It is a pleasure to be with you today from sunny and hot Scottsdale, Arizona. As you just mentioned, Dr. Brandt, my name is Virginia Madueño, and I am currently serving as the vice chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. I was appointed, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on myself so that you and your team know a little bit more about who I am. I was appointed by Governor Newsom in April of 2021 after having served 2 terms on the California Boating and Waterways Commission, where I spent a good deal of time addressing the issues of invasive aquatic species, given our climate change issues and the impact it was having on our waterways and the escalation, especially in the Delta. I am a former mayor and council member for the city of Riverbank, California. I'm a small business owner and consultant, and I own a public relations and marketing firm where I specialize in transportation and infrastructure planning and outreach. And it is truly an honor and a very humbling experience to serve on the Delta Stewardship Council, given California's drastic challenges with climate change, the drought, and wildfires. And it will become more important for us as an agency to ensure the protection of the Delta's ecosystem and, of course, sustainable management of the Delta. And although I'm not a scientist and would never pretend to be a scientist, given that math was never my strong suit in school, it is indeed a pleasure to work with such an outstanding board of scientists such as yourselves and this body of the Independent Science Board to work together to ensure the health and well-being of California's only nationally recognized heritage area, our Delta. I truly look forward to attending future ISB meetings in person with you and getting to know all of you better as we collaborate to ensure the needs and the goals of the Delta. And I also want to thank you for your last report. And unfortunately, I had to take a flight early. And so I listened to the majority of your monitoring enterprise report. And I can tell you that it is a lot of discussion within the staff itself. And I'm hoping to get a more detailed brief in the coming days and weeks. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. As I was sharing with you, Dr. Brandt, I applaud you for what you have done with regard to succession planning for your chairship. I think that you have a well-established model and something that we can learn from at the Delta Stewardship Council. So again, thank you so much for your time, for your work and your leadership to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else we could do to help inform you on a monitoring review or anything, just let us know. We're happy to give you whatever kind of briefing or discussion we can on that. So just let us know.
You know what, Dr. Brandt, yes, and I suspect we're going to be working a lot closer together. I think that, again, the work that you do is imperative, absolutely imperative to the future of the Delta and to the work that we do at the Delta Stewardship Council. And so I think that there has to be a lot more integration, a lot more collaboration. And I think that there's also opportunities for us to foster more relationships in the community so that they understand the value of what you bring to the table and the work that it has on the Delta. So thank you.
Thank you. Amanda, are you also part of this report?
Oh, my apologies. I think I was supposed to turn the baton over to Amanda. So good morning,
Okay.
Amanda, and the floor is now yours.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Toinio. Happy to be with you all this morning. So I'm going to first share the itinerary for next week's council meeting and tour. And then I'll talk a little bit about DPIC, and then I'll introduce, I think, our last speaker, our last council speaker for the morning. So next week's council meeting is primarily a tour of the Delta. And so I'll just kind of walk through that itinerary. So the council meeting will start at 8 a.m. with a few items of business at the CNRA Resources headquarters. At 8:30 a.m., vans will depart for Brandon Island State Recreation Area, where the council will hear updates on Delta DAPS and from the Delta Watermaster. Around 10, 2 boats will depart for the water tour with Michael George and John Burrow from USGS. And I have been asked to note that there is limited public seating on the boats and that we really are trying to reserve those seats for the public, and that they will be a first come, first serve. Let's see, at noon, the boats will stop at the Sugar Barge on Bethel Island for a lunch discussion. And then at 1, the boat tour will resume with a return to Brandon Island around 2 p.m. At which point we will depart for Stockton, and we'll be stopping at Weber Point, which is on the water, where the council will hear an update on the environmental justice issue paper and from environmental justice expert group members, Matt Holmes from Little Manila Rising and Barbara Berrigan-Perea from Restore the Delta. We'll probably adjourn the meeting around 4 p.m. The council, the meeting notice is up on the website, as well as with the tour itinerary, so the public is welcome to join us at all the land-based stops. We will be, actually, I'm not sure if we're streaming the portions that are here in the morning before we get going, but we can find that out for you. Any questions about the tour before I switch to DPIC? Okay. So yeah, as Steve mentioned earlier, one of the July 18th DPIC meeting will include a presentation on the monitoring enterprise review. And in fact, given all the recent and current activity around monitoring in the Delta, we're planning to focus the majority of the DPIC meeting on monitoring. So in addition to your presentation, the ISB's presentation on the monitoring enterprise review, Louise Conrad and Bruce DeGenero will be discussing the CSAMP and CAMP monitoring evaluation process that is currently underway. And then Carl Wilcox from CDFW will discuss the 6 agency monitoring redesign related to the 5 long-term biological monitoring studies in the estuary. And we really are hoping that by focusing at the meeting on monitoring and kind of bringing everybody together and kind of getting everyone on the same page, we're hoping to have a discussion around kind of collective next steps and then the synergies that some of us are kind of seeing amongst the various monitoring reviews and efforts. And so I look forward to working with Steve and others who are planning to present to talk about that presentation and to discuss more about kind of what everyone else is going to be talking about. So, and I've started working with Edmund already to begin scheduling some time to talk about that. So, any questions about that? Great. Okay, well, with that, I will introduce Abbott Dutton, the Council's Assistant Deputy for External Affairs and Communications. Abbott.
Hi, thank you, Amanda, for that welcome. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Again, my name is Abbott Dutton. I am the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for External Affairs and Communications at the Council. I'm here today and happy to do so to talk to you about one of the 2 teams that I lead at the Council, the Communications Department. So I've prepared a little PowerPoint for you, a quick overview of what we do to introduce you to the Communications team. Next slide, please. Let's begin with who is on the comms team. Myself as the Communications Director, also Brittany Young as Information Officer 2, and Geneva Hutchison as Information Officer 1. Next slide. So we support the Council, the Delta Science Program, and the Delta ISB and DPIC by implementing a communications plan that details audiences, who we're trying to reach, messages, how we're trying to communicate, products that we present information, and platforms, how we distribute those products, and performance metrics, how we define success. So when the Delta ISB staff starts working on a project, we work with the science staff who supports the ISB. They consult with the comms team to create a communications plan that will address all of the above. Next slide, please. Want to talk about some recent milestones and activities that the comms team has we're starting with a rebranding effort in 2018, which introduced a suite of new logos, colors, and fonts that we use today. Furthering our agency's commitment to accessibility in 2019 to comply with statewide standards, developing communications tools and templates for staff in 2020, and finalizing the communication strategy in 2021. Next slide, please. So on a daily basis, the comms team creates and distributes content through several different channels: the council's website, a listserv, our social media platforms, and print publications like our annual report. I want to talk about the listserv, which is the mechanism we use to mass email announcements to those who subscribe to our listserv. If you look on the right side of the screen, that is one of the recent ones we sent out. We sent that out in March to announce the new ISB members. You could see that it has the picture of the members, has a link to the news release that we issued, and also some sub-stories that help tell the story of the announcement we just made. So if you haven't done so already, I highly encourage you to subscribe to our listserv. You'll receive all of the announcements that we make at the council. Also, members of the public who are watching, I encourage you to do the same. You can do that by going to our homepage, the deltastewardshipcouncil.ca.gov. Go to the homepage, go all the way down to the bottom, and there's a subscribe button where you can get updates. And that'll take you straight to the page where you can sign up to receive those updates, and you automatically will start receiving them. We are also very active on social media. Our main platforms are Twitter and Instagram. In the middle, you'll see a tweet we did to announce the Delta ISB's monitoring enterprise review when that was released. So I also encourage you to follow us on our social media platforms. And like I said, we post on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and also YouTube. Next slide, please. So the comms team works with the Delta Science staff to support the Delta ISB. And to date, this has entailed regularly reviewing and distributing monthly meeting information, creating templates for reviews and reports, such as info sheets, fact sheets, FAQs, flyers, etc. Reviewing and supporting the formatting of products like the reports and the information sheets, distributing announcements to partner platforms and newsletters like Maven's Notebook and DWR's Delta E-News publication team, and monitoring mentions of the board in digital media and responding accordingly. Next slide. So I know this is a lot. It's a quick overview of what we do to support the Delta ISB in addition to the council and the science program and DPIC. I look forward to working with you to promoting the valuable work that you do. My staff does as well. So thank you. If you have any questions for me, or also I've asked Brittany Young, who you've met before in previous hearings, to join me in case there's a question that I can't answer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Abbott. Any questions from board members? Tom.
Yeah, I have a question about stakeholders. We've been starting a review and identifying stakeholders. We started from scratch, and I'm wondering if there's any sort of master list or organization of stakeholders. So when you reach out to groups, you have them sort of organized, and sort of a brief summary of what those categories would be if you do have such a list.
Well, we have lists that we use to reach out, absolutely. These are people who may have attended some of our webinars or some of the speeches in the past that can help us as well. But we do reach out to them. I can't recite them right now, but I could work with staff to make sure that you're reaching the stakeholders that you want to. And I don't know if Brittany wants to add anything to that.
That's all
But
good.
yeah.
The science program might have a more science-focused outreach list that comms would be happy to help add to. But yeah, between the two of us, I bet we can get you guys started.
Yeah, and if you know some that you would like to add to it, let us know as well.
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. So I'm curious how much you do sort of substantive science journalism outreach versus community understanding the management implications kind of thing. Do you want to guesstimate a proportion?
Science outreach, we have blogs are very active on our website. You can see those. We like adding blogs to our website from staff. I'm not sure about the percentage. I'd have to ask the science staff on that. Maybe Edmund or Lauren can help with that.
Okay, well, the percentage is less important than I just want to understand. Do you have connections with science journalists where you try to get in more to the substantive nature of scientific findings? I know you do a lot on the management side. So.
Right. Yeah, we work with the science program, and the science communication program has those contacts, and they put us in contact with them.
A little bit to add to that, SFUs, Estuary News, Avon's Notebook, those are the people that we work with the most often. The science program recently has been working with Frontiers for Young Minds, which targets younger scientist audiences, more youth-based. So there's definitely connections between our team and the science programs, but in specifically for science journalism, I would say the science program staff is that's more their wheelhouse than ours. We're more broad audience type media.
Okay, Virginia.
So I wanted to follow up on Tom's question, because your answer was that you list people who are stakeholders who's reached out to you, but I wondered if anyone has made an attempt to identify those who are not normally in these discussions.
I would have to turn to the science staff to ask them what they've done. Our outreach at events, obviously those are going to increase now that the pandemic is ending, but our outreach at events is one way that we can get more people involved in our in what we do. Brittany mentioned, SFUs and CEPI and Avon's Notebook. That's another way we can get people involved. And again, our mechanism right now is to lead them to our listserv where we can get them signed up and keep them informed about the work that we do.
Yeah. To tack on a little bit extra, the science program, I remember they put together a list of groups that maybe we haven't reached out to before for our last solicitation for competitive research awards. So I know that they have done an evaluation. I don't know how thorough. I'm sure it was very thorough. The science program staff are fantastic. So I know that they've done an evaluation of who we could maybe be doing a better job of reaching to kind of diversify beyond just the Delta and broader California, broader Bay Delta. So I know that there's been some work done there. It was just more on behalf of the science program rather than the communications team.
Thank you.
I can add a little bit to this. One of the things, so within the science program, one of the things we do is there are a lot of partner agencies and partner collaborative groups that have their own listservs. And one of the things that has been really effective for us to get the word out to the more scientific communities is to ask those groups to also forward the listserv that our communications staff provides. And that's, for example, that's what we did when we did our assessment of the Delta Independent Science Board. And I think we were very successful in getting those partner agencies to spread the word on our behalf. And I think that was in large part how we were able to get a much larger response to our survey. So that's one of the big ways that we do that.
So
Okay, well,
Lauren,
that's
Lauren, is that routinely done with our reviews? And when you say us, that's who's us?
Within the science program, I would have to, I'm not sure, Edmund, I would have to ask Edmund if we've been doing that for the ISB reviews. But it's generally for when we have science program events or surveys like the one that I mentioned for the Delta ISB assessment.
So Edmund, do our reviews go through the agencies and ask them whether or not they can be sent out through their list reviews, their listservs?
Yeah, so in terms of audiences, it kind of differs by project. So for your different reviews, it does go out to different listservs in addition to the councils, depending on the review topic. We identify the appropriate venues to distribute to. This applies to most projects in general, where we identify which audiences we need to make aware of the project and what kind of feedback we need. So for example, for the water supply reliability review, it also went out to the council's listserv, the CLEMP listserv, and also the California Water Quality Monitoring Council's listserv as well. As those are the appropriate target audiences that we wanted for that specific questionnaire.
Okay, it seems like Abbott, you said that you when we were sort of nearing the beginning of a review, you guys put together a communications strategy for that. And part of our prospectus, what we put out at the beginning of each review, includes some of the same elements. We ask in the 2-page prospectus who the audience is and even talk about what the outreach is. I don't know that any of our board members are involved in or have seen what your communication strategy is for any one of our reviews. Is there some way that we can be more involved in that so that when we do a review, that we can have a communication strategy that the board has a chance to look at? And more broadly, we have asked the Delta program staff to the board to put together a general communication and stakeholder engagement strategy for the board, sort of guidance and an outline, and here's what our strategy is going to be as we move forward. So then we can look at applying that for any one of our individual reviews and then tailor it to that individual review. So I guess I'm asking, can we be involved in the individual communication strategy for a review, and then can you help us with this development of this general communication and stakeholder engagement strategy?
Absolutely, yeah. We do that already, but we work with Edmund and Lauren and the science staff. They bring your project to us, and we consult with them on the best way and the best tools to share that announcement. So absolutely would appreciate more of that and to help spread the word. So yeah, I think so.
Okay, I see Tanya, then Virginia.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I guess my question is, to what extent are you tracking any specific metrics on the success of your communication strategy, and how does that work? And are you tracking who opens emails, or how many clicks you're getting on downloads and things like that? How do you track that?
Absolutely, I'm glad you asked that. Our listserv is sent out by Constant Contacts, and they have great metrics that they can provide to us. Within 24 hours, we're able to see who receives the listserv and who opens it up and who clicks the links that might be in there. So it's valuable information for us. We forward that on to the science program with any listserv that pertains to the ISB. But it does give us valuable information, and we learn from that when may be the best time to send out a listserv. Obviously, you don't want to do it on a Friday when everyone's going away on the weekend. We learn the value of the information that we provided in that listserv. So yeah, we do get those metrics. We also, and I believe you started receiving this, I know it was in your meeting items for this month, but this was the outreach highlights report. I think this may have been the first month you received it. And that report summarizes our social media metrics. If you take a look at that, I'll show you what the top posts were. Maybe not the top, but maybe the new additions to the social media that had a lot of retweets or a lot of engagement. So that is something you will continue to receive. I know that we started that recently. So you'll continue to receive those metrics.
Thank you. That's great. And I think some of that information we should, as we engage maybe a little more on some of the strategy for outreach on particular reports and the like, it might be helpful to kind of think about what's been effective and, should we retool certain strategies for getting the word out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Virginia?
So I asked my question about stakeholders because I was particularly concerned about what some people call traditionally disenfranchised groups. And one group I'm thinking of is, I heard for some geographic region in the US, 15% of those people don't have access to computers. And there are probably others. And I just thought that we should think about those types of groups specifically. It sounds like you've done a good job with some of the other groups.
Thanks. I have one more question. And you said you keep track of the media mentions of the board and respond accordingly if needed. Not that we really want to know that stuff, but I'm wondering if you do keep a record so that we can refer to it, and because it is useful for us to know whether or not what's being said about us and things like that. Is there some record or spreadsheet that you could send the leadership team? Maybe there is no mention, but I think it's valuable for us to know when those mentions are made.
Right. Brittany could probably speak to more of that. She is over the social media. She might have some ideas, but those we already gather up those analytics, so we could easily pass that on to you when you're mentioned, when the ISB is mentioned.
Yeah, and I would think we don't need it every day, but I mean, like on a monthly or depending on frequency or every second month or something, just so we can, if there's some things that are some buzz out there about us, we'll know about it.
Yeah, that is something to think about, maybe to add to our outreach highlights report. And I appreciate that suggestion, but maybe adding just a category with some recent comments that we've received from the public. That's a good idea. So I appreciate that.
Okay, Virginia, do you still have your hand up or? Okay, well, I really appreciate you giving this presentation, and I want to thank you on behalf of the board on all the wonderful work you do for us, because I know we give you things that are basically word text, and you all turn it into something that's readable and with the graphics and the photos and stuff. And I know we often pressure you and say, we want this by tomorrow, and it's only 150 pages long. What's taken so long? So I think that we really appreciate the effort and hope you understand our urgency at times, and you've always met it. So I thank you for all your help.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it for the, is that it for the council report? Okay. I think so. And any public comments on this?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation for providing your comments.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins from California Water Research. And during the campaign to save the Delta Independent Science Board, I became sort of a spanning node between the Delta Science Program and the groups that have been most involved in defending the use of best available science for management of fish under the Trump administration. And there's, unfortunately, it's been an absolute disaster. The Delta smelt are going extinct. They're reintroducing some in hatchery this year, but it's a very bad year for survival of larval smelt. And 2 of the 3 year classes of winter run Chinook salmon have been basically destroyed last 2 years, and there's a 3rd year class that's going to be destroyed this year because there just isn't enough cold water in the reservoirs. So there is a water contractor bias that the scientists and experts who work with these groups do litigation, not science. But really they're in a very desperate battle to try to keep fish from going extinct and to ensure the use of best available science in management of California water. And they're involved in litigation over the Trump biological opinions. So this is an important group, and I reached out and explained the importance of the Independent Science Board, and it's recognized. Some of the folks who aren't scientifically oriented had some negative characterizations of the Delta Independent Science Board and thought you were funded by the Department of Water Resources, and I've explained that. But they're just a critically important group. There's been a PPIC survey that found that environmental groups had their beliefs about Delta stressors most closely track those of scientists and experts on the Delta. And I'm hoping to continue to bring information from those groups and to try to find ways to get them to engage. They're very limited right now because it's such a difficult year. The reservoirs are all empty, and runoff was snow seems to be evaporating. And I'm also working with leading climate scientists to try to figure that out. And it was something that I wrote the Department of Water Resources about 10 years ago, saying you need to consider that, you know, stream runoff patterns might be changing and we might not be able to rely on the history. So I hope in your, the Delta Science Program has tended to rely on people who are engaging and to see those as the only legitimate actors in Delta science, but there is this whole other group that I've worked with closely over the last decade, or actually 12 years. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Deidre, for that important information. Any other comments, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is the Delta Lead Scientist Report by Laurel Larsen.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning to all the ISB members. I'm going to provide a few brief updates on Delta Science Program workshops before I talk about the revisions that were made to the Science Action Agenda in response to the Delta Independent Science Board's comments. So the first thing I wanted to report out on today is just a brief report on the Modeling Summit. This is something that I have brought to this group before. But as a reminder, the Delta Science Program is planning a modeling summit for late summer of 2022. And that summit aims to bring together members of the Delta science and modeling community. And we are looking, like just following on this discussion of stakeholders, we are looking to expand that community beyond the groups that are traditionally at the table. But the purpose of the meeting will really be to discuss the vision for the collaboratory and identify the next steps towards the development of that collaboratory. We plan to invite representatives from other systems and other programs that have developed widely used infrastructure for coupling models and making them transparent and available to the community, and really collaborating over problems that require interdisciplinary models that look at the evolution of multiple types of variables in these environmental systems. So there will be a discussion of these successful lessons learned from other systems. There will likely be a discussion of funding opportunities for the collaboratory and identification of what are the lower hanging fruit items that we could implement with minimal funding, all the way up to what's the larger scale vision, and how do we get to that larger scale vision by pursuing various competitive funding opportunities and opportunities to leverage funds from other agencies. So the planning committee has convened for the first time already. The next meeting of the planning committee is next week. Dr. Jay Lund is participating in the planning of the summit. And I will continue to provide you with updates as they are available. So any quick questions on that before I report out on our recent salinity management workshop?
Yeah, Laurel, I have one question now. You have the salinity workshop going and then the modeling summit. Is the modeling summit, I'm a little confused, is that a salinity focused modeling summit? Because then you also have a fall workshop as well, October 11th. I'm reading your thing here.
Yes, I will talk about the salinity management workshop next. So these are two separate planning efforts with different communities, although there is overlap between them. And one of the things I'm really excited about is there's synergism between these two workshops. So I think that in order to fund a collaboratory and present a compelling case that this is something that our community needs, we do need to identify specific science problems, science and management problems that having a collaboratory would help us to address. I think the challenge of salinity management in the face of sea level rise and future extended drought conditions is a really compelling problem for which we need these integrated modeling capabilities. And so that's the synergism. So we are going to be developing some of the cyber infrastructure for tackling the salinity management challenge associated with that series of workshops. We'll be building a community around the collaborative use of these models, and that infrastructure and those human resources that are being built are things that are portable to other problems and can be seen as a foundation on which the collaboratory can be built. So I think we'll be able to leverage these two efforts against each other because both are going to require our science and management community to invest new resources in order to fully realize.
So I understand the salinity part, but for the modeling summit, is there a theme? Because often when you do models of sort, you have sort of an ultimate goal. So is it a fish goal, a restoration goal, or is it just everything else?
It's more general. It's more focused on building the tools and the community, and it actually builds upon a previous modeling summit that Peter Goodwin had convened, which is, where he was really launching this idea that we need a collaboratory for our Delta. He got a lot of buy-in, a lot of support from QEMF, the collaborative modeling group that is already in existence. And that summit led to the science program investing resources into really establishing an outlook for this collaboratory. We hired Tetra Tech as a consultant to produce a memo that outlined next steps in the development of the collaboratory. It outlined the collective vision of the group of people that Peter Goodwin convened. And this effort will be building on those previous efforts.
Okay, are there dates for this modeling summit in the summer?
Not yet. That is to be determined at this next meeting. The modeling summit, I said late summer, that was our original plan. I actually think we're discussing November as a potential month, which is not summer, but
really
sometime
late
in the
summer.
sometime in the second quarter of this year.
Okay,
So
Tanya,
I'll announce those as soon as they're available.
thanks. Tanya?
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. Just a quick question. Do you see a role for the ISB when you get to the point of maybe developing the collaboratory proposal? Is that something that you want our feedback on, or that you see us contributing to in some way as kind of a review body or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, you know, there's a bit of a conundrum here, because if this is something that the ISB, that we want the ISB to review at a later date, there is a conflict of interest if the ISB is kind of at the grassroots helping to develop it with the rest of the community. We were very intentional about extending the invite to Jay Lund to be on the planning committee, because we do want that feedback at this stage. But I think, you know, this will be a topic of future discussions between us and the Independent Science Board. Where do we fall on which side of the line do we fall in terms of whether we want the ISB to review this later or be integrally involved in the development of the collaboratory?
I think in terms of the conflict of interest, of course, if you're talking about a November workshop and Jay has been working as an individual on that, he'll be off the board by then. By then, so unless he's consulting with members of the board regularly on this, there should not be a conflict of interest. And normally in this case, if someone has been intimately involved, then they can recuse themselves from any further review, as long as it hasn't been a sort of a board or board group activity. So don't leave us out because you think there's a conflict of interest, and we'll make that determination.
Sounds good. Yeah, I expect that, you know, this will be a great topic of discussion during some of the future in-person meetings, and I'm really looking forward to that. Great. So let me go on if there's no more questions about the modeling summit. I did want to provide a bit of a brief report out on the Salinity Management Workshop, which was held April 26th through 27th. And I want to also just mention that some of the insights developed through this Salinity Management Workshop series could help inform future reviews, namely the climate change forecasting potential review and the scenario tongue-tied this morning, scenario development science review. I also just wanted to give you a reminder that this workshop was the first in a series of workshops that's designed to build understanding of the range of issues associated with salt intrusion to the Delta, foster discussion of different salinity management tools and strategies, and identify knowledge gaps that could be filled with future research and modeling, as well as to pilot a collaborative scenario design and modeling exercise that's really to be seen as a demonstration exercise for the type of learning and the type of discussions that can be facilitated using a collaborative scenario development approach. I want to mention that Dr. Tanya Hekela moderated a panel discussion on creating an adaptive management framework for managing salinity and understanding trade-offs of alternative approaches. And both Dr. Hekela and Dr. Joe Fernando attended the workshop. So at the end of this report out, I'm going to be calling on the two of you to ask about your thoughts and comments. You know, just to report out on some stats and some of the thinking that emerged from that workshop. I will say that the workshop was very successful from the standpoint of participation. We had nearly 200 registrants, and at any given time in the workshop, there were often upwards of 100 participants in the Zoom room. One of the things that we heard from the participants time and time again is that we really need this neutral, safe space to exchange conversation about diverse perspectives on salinity management, many of which aren't typically represented in agency planning decisions. And our plan moving forward is we're going to hold a series of focused working group meetings, 3 focused working group meetings over the summer and into the early fall, in which we explicitly seek more detailed feedback on the pilot exercise that we're developing from particular stakeholder groups. One of those will be collaboratively held with the Delta Adapts group. We're looking into using their agricultural focused working group as a way to collect some of the information that we're looking for as well. And then that will lead into the second salinity management workshop, in which we will have results from the pilot exercise. And I'll say a little bit more about what that exercise is shaping up to look like. But that having those results will really focus discussion around the method or the metrics that we want to use to evaluate these scenarios, as well as identify what the gaps are. And just by talking about the scenarios or the pilot exercise that the modeling subcommittee is proposing, we got a lot of feedback on what the gaps and shortcomings with the existing tools are. There was a lot of expression of the need to relax some of the assumptions that are in the CalSim model that's used to represent reservoir operations in the watershed. And there was a lot of desire to look at modified regulations for salinity within the Delta, in addition to looking at strategies such as the use of nature-based solutions or wetland restoration to redistribute salinity through the Delta, or the use of salinity barriers to inhibit the penetration of salts into the central and south Delta. So one of the things that we asked the workshop participants for feedback on too was, what are the trade-offs that they're really interested in us coupling to modeled outputs of salinity under these future scenarios? And the most common type of trade-off that the workshop participants expressed an interest in were biological effects, like the impact on food webs, habitat connectivity, and the prevalence of invasive species. And then closely related to those concerns about effects on non-human ecosystems was a concern for water quality, in particular surrounding harmful algal blooms and contaminants. Concerns over water quality were frequently linked with comments about understanding the impact of salinity management strategies on the supply of fresh, usable water to users within the Delta and beyond. There were also a wide range of comments about the importance of assessing trade-offs in terms of their direct impacts on people. Concerns about the effects of agriculture were the most common type of these social-oriented trade-offs, including comments about soil salinity, reduced agricultural production, and possible changes in crop type. There was interest in economic impacts of the future scenarios. And participants were interested in a broad suite of social effects as well, including those that are really challenging to assess in a quantitative way. In fact, we got pushed towards discussion of what sort of qualitative means might we use to assess some of these trade-offs. And that's something that really needs to play out a little bit more. There were also comments about impacts on fishing, both recreational and subsistence, boating, and a need to establish metrics that are meaningful to the communities actually living in the Delta and who will experience the effects of any management decisions. Let me see, I'm just scanning through my notes. There was an emphasis on the need for long-term thinking, with the participants pointing out that solutions that work now might not work under future climate conditions. In particular, we need strategies that are resilient to climate change. We need to be looking at what happens if marshes that are represented in the models now drown with future sea level rise. How would that impact future outcomes? So I want to just turn it over to Tanya and Joe to ask for your quick thoughts on the workshop before I move into my discussion of the science action agenda revisions.
I think you did an excellent job, Laurel, summarizing some of the highlights that I remember from from the workshop, and I really enjoyed the workshop. I feel like I learned a lot, and I think it was structured really well. It's hard to do that in Zoom, and to give people an opportunity, as you said, for kind of that safe space or that trusting space for people to have conversations about, you know, politically charged issues and complicated issues that not everybody comes to the table with the same understanding. And I think there was you did a nice job, or the science program did a nice job of kind of setting some of the baseline information for the participants to have, you know, deep conversations about some of these issues related to the trade-offs and what we need to be thinking about for, you know, modeling into the future, and just the challenges of how we deal with some of the climate change issues. I guess, I mean, the only thing I think you already said it, but the only thing I would probably emphasize is that I did hear, you know, a little bit of tension perhaps in how people thought about this pilot exercise, and you know, just the challenges of taking a pilot exercise and kind of preceding it before we really have like a clear kind of consensus on what needs to go into that pilot exercise. And I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg challenge there. You kind of need the pilot exercise to give some kind of play into the conversation. And you know, I don't think there's one best way of doing that, but just to acknowledge that tension that seemed to come up, and think of, you know, how do we use that to embrace this kind of adaptive management idea and how we move forward. So thanks, it was great.
Thank you, Tanya. I've been having a lot of conversations internally and with some of our external planning committee members about communication of the goals of the pilot exercise, because I think one danger is that if its purpose in this series of workshops isn't communicated well, there is a danger of people picking up the results and seeing it as a final product of this process, which is not what we want. We want to use it almost as a teaching tool, an instructional tool, a guide for conversation, something to leverage to demonstrate the importance of this approach, while acknowledging that the exercise is by no means comprehensive. And so we will be really focusing on that communication component going into the second workshop. And I think one of the things that's important is producing a document that conveys not just the results of the pilot exercise, but really includes those results in a layout of the next steps for how to launch this collaborative adaptive management process, to show that it is just an initial step in what we hope the outcome will be. Yeah. Joe, was there anything you wanted to add?
You guys really explained this very clearly. I was just a bystander. In fact, Tanya did an excellent job getting that policy aspects and the conversation aspects into the whole table there. And one thing I really realize is how much the salinity management is an integral part of the ecosystem management in the delta, because it's connected to the fish, it connects to the climate change, and everything with the salinity comes in between all of those things. So I think it's really worthwhile, from the pilot exercise to the real ones, and also you saw the amount of participation was excellent, and hope that will continue. So, and thank you for the nice explanation and discussion about it.
Thanks to both of you as well. And again, look forward to continuing to communicate with the ISB about this. For my last 10 minutes, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to thank Rachel Klopfenstein for these slides. Can you all see the Science Action Agenda title slide? Great. Okay. So Rachel Klopfenstein prepared many of these slides, but I am pleased to report, first of all, that the final Science Action Agenda was released on Earth Day, April 22nd. And then on the 28th, it was presented to the Delta Stewardship Council and officially received and accepted by the council. So that means the document is live now. And you have a copy of it in your packet. And we're hoping to get printed copies soon for distribution. So I'm going to be focusing this presentation mostly on the revisions to the Science Action Agenda, but because this is also a public meeting, I have a few slides reminding us all of what the Science Action Agenda is. It's a 4 to 5 year science agenda for the Delta that really helps us to prioritize and align science actions to inform management decisions. The Science Action Agenda identifies some of the major gaps in knowledge that need to be filled to address pressing management issues. It was developed in a collaborative way and hence promotes collaborative science, and it builds science infrastructure. The 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda was used to guide over $35 million in science investments, not just by the Stewardship Council, but by our funding partners at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, CDFW, and contributions from the state water contractors. Now, one of the things that we did receive comments on from both the ISB and other entities was just the need to really clearly define the scope of science actions and define the role of these science actions. And so we want to clarify exactly what we mean here. For the purposes of the Science Action Agenda, we define a science action as scientific activities undertaken to generate information or create tools that advance the utility of knowledge to address the physical, natural, and social economic challenges of the Delta. So examples of those things include research, monitoring, modeling, and more. There's really two categories for activities: those that generate new information and those that enhance how we use the information that we have. I do want to say that in the introduction of the revised document, we clarified the scale and scope of these science actions, stating very clearly that the science actions guide decisions about how to allocate funds for critical science investigations over a 4 to 5 year time frame. And that within that time frame, the Delta Science Program facilitates the assessment and refocusing of priority science actions. Progress is measured on the science actions during that period, though those science actions may require continued attention beyond the 4 to 5 year time frame. And this is particularly true for science actions that are foundational, really providing a foundation from which to address longer term science and management needs. We had several questions in the public review about the focus of science actions, and we have clarified that science actions are responsive to management needs and the management questions, and as a result, they're not narrowly focused and cannot likely be addressed by only one project. So that by design, there's room for the researchers and scientists to use creative solutions and multiple approaches within those actions. In the ISB's recommendation for things to consider in the future, you had mentioned that it might be advantageous to use SMART metrics for evaluating the science actions, where SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Really appreciate the suggestion to start thinking about how we might assess these science actions using different metrics, but we thought that because of the design of these science actions and their open-endedness for the community, there are some challenges for identifying what those SMART metrics would be. That said, we really appreciate that feedback, and we'll consider your feedback regarding future tracking of the science actions moving forward. So this is just a reminder of the structure of the Science Action Agenda. There's 3 hierarchical components. Management needs are at the top of the pyramid and are the broadest component. As you know, we've landed on 6 management needs. Below that, we have management questions, which offer slightly more resolution on the key management uncertainties. And through public outreach and input, we landed on 65 management questions. And then we added 1 more in response to public comments. I'll mention that one a little bit later. So 66 is the final total in the Science Action Agenda. And then central to all of this are the science actions themselves at the bottom of the pyramid, for which we've prioritized 25 based on public input. And those 25 are going to be the ones designated for funding in the near term. But I'll also mention that we had so many good suggestions for science actions that the final document preserves 75 of them in the appendix. There was a comment about whether the management needs and science actions themselves are prioritized, and we made the explicit decision not to put them in any priority order, but rather to group them thematically, and all are equally eligible for funding. The reality is that as we seek to expand our funding program with funding partners, our partners in other agencies often have more specific mandates for the type of research that they fund. And so they may fund projects that are focused specifically on particular science actions or management needs within this larger portfolio. But we do seek to provide funding for the whole spectrum across the different partners that contribute funding to the science action agenda. So here is a reminder of the 6 management needs that we landed on. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read them out, but rather I'll just say that the science actions associated with these management needs are cross-cutting and integrative. And these management needs focus broadly on the need to expand social science research within the Delta, to anticipate changes due to future climate change, and really to understand some of the interacting effects of various stressors and drivers within the Delta. You might be interested in some of the statistics associated with co-production of the science action agenda. We had over 30 collaborative groups engaged in the process. We had about 150 survey responses to inform the development process. We started out with 1,200 management questions and 150 plus science actions that were narrowed down to the numbers that you saw on the previous slide. 140 workshop participants that distilled management questions and identified science actions. And then we had over 30 reviewers comment on the draft or on the progress summary. And then we received 18 written comments on the draft management needs and draft of the 2022 to 2026 science action agenda. So on the SAA itself, we had 14 public comments, including the Delta Independent Science Boards. Some of the primary feedback and changes resulted in us better connecting the prioritized science actions to relevant legislation. I'll show you some examples on one of the next slides. There were minor text revisions to the science actions themselves, clarification on the temporal scope and scale of the science actions, as I mentioned previously, a greater emphasis on water supply, synthesis, integrative modeling, and drought, and then more information about how the progress made on the previous science action agenda directly influenced the selection of science actions for this science action agenda. So I'll go into a few details. One of the overarching comments that we received from the ISB was really the need to clarify the guiding principle and the guiding vision for the science action agenda. And so the introductory and forward materials were really completely rewritten in response to these comments. And the science action agenda was kind of reformulated around a theme of integration. And, you know, integration is one of these words that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So what do we mean here in weaving together these various components of the patchwork quilt? That's the analogy that I'm using. So by integration, I mean evaluation of many simultaneous changes and responses that require multidisciplinary understanding. It means assimilation of data into models, collaborative planning and analysis that spans agencies and interest groups, weaving together different forms of knowledge, including traditional knowledge, local community knowledge, and Western scientific approaches. The combination and coupling of models formerly used independently. And then how does this science action agenda become formulated around this vision of integration? Well, the science actions help us achieve this vision by advancing basic understanding of social components of the Delta. These areas of research really lag behind research on biophysical sciences. Advanced understanding of how different components of the Delta function as a system. And so by that, I mean understanding interactive effects or maybe threshold type responses of managed fish to small changes in the underlying drivers. Identification of dominant drivers of phenomena amidst simultaneous changes in several variables. Another component is providing accessible, relevant data for measuring the changing delta. This data should be available on timeframes reasonable to inform future operations and should be relevant to emerging management concerns. Implementation of adaptive management experiments, which helps us reduce multiple types of uncertainty and stimulate learning that can only be done by doing. Develop tools for integrative planning. This refers to modeling tools for forecasting and scenario-based projection. Collaborative approaches in the development of scenarios is something that the document advocates in order for the models to be sufficiently informed and trusted by the community. And then assessment of trade-offs and multiple benefits of planned and ongoing management actions and policies. This figure didn't make it into the final document, but kind of shapes how all of these different components of integration are interlinked. And all of these really collectively help us get to where we need to get in terms of assessing trade-offs and multiple benefits of actions with ultimately with benefits to invasive species, wetland restoration, native species recovery, human well-being, and HABs as just a few examples of some of the management outcomes. So one of the other revisions is that we added this new figure or added these revisions to figure 1 to clarify the inputs and outputs of the science action agenda and show how the science action agenda will be adaptively managed. And with respect to that adaptive management, we added some text that talks about how in the development of the next science action agenda, science program staff will assess the various trade-offs associated with this approach to updating the science action agenda, including the level of co-production, the time and capacity demands of the science program and partners, the need for flexibility in the document to account for emerging needs, and other approaches to further strengthen and streamline the science action agenda for the benefit of the science and management community. We had received some comments on really this need to evaluate co-production and participation, and this is very much what we want to do. We will explore options to evaluate and improve the co-production aspects of the science action agenda development, as well as how inductive or deductive the process should be. And then in terms of the need to clearly state how science actions were aggregated and prioritized, we provided clearer details in appendices A and C on these criteria, as well as on the level of specificity that goes into the science actions. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just going through these really quickly. There were comments on the need to establish linkages between science actions and other initiatives, projects, and programs. And so in our table of science actions, we really expanded the context column to provide that context for each and every science action. And then here's just a few examples that you could see. There were questions about how the science action agenda gets implemented. And I just want to say that funding science research is our key mechanism of implementation. And myself and the rest of the science program are actively exploring additional funding partners right now so that the funding of these actions can really reflect or mirror the community effort that went into the creation of these actions. We also expanded on the description of the next steps in the science action agenda itself. And then in terms of addressing urgent science needs, the Independent Science Board urged us to include water supply actions more explicitly in the document. And so we revisited several of the science actions to make water supply more prominent. Here's 2C, where I think we added a new, or I think 2C already mentioned water supply, but we added additional context. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with 2D. For 2D, we added additional context to the action that emphasizes its connection to water supply. I think we newly added water supply to 2C and explicitly mentioned it in 6A. And then we added a new management question associated with consumptive water use by invasive aquatic vegetation associated with management need 3. We elaborated further on our drought science action in terms of more explicitly stating what the knowledge gaps are within the context. And then we also honed and clarified terminology associated with our use of the words modeling and forecasting and prediction. And so 2 paragraphs were added to the description of management need 2 that really focuses on what integration and interoperability mean in the context of modeling, what we mean by forecasting, and so on. There were comments and questions about the extent to which social scientists were involved. And so I just want to start out by saying Dr. Jessica Rednick, our Sea Grant Extension Specialist within the Council, is our in-house social scientist, and she played a key role in the development of science actions and then the revisions of human dimension science actions based on the comments that we received. So for example, the Independent Science Board report urged us to focus more specifically on institutional outcomes of co-production. So we added some language to 4C, and we also added an explicit mention of human communities as affected by HABs for 5C. And then I just wanted to mention that as the social science community of practice gets underway, there will be additional opportunities for social scientists to formally provide input in future iterations of the SAA. And then there were outstanding gaps in science actions from the last science action agenda that we explicitly added to Appendix B. So this is a new column here. And the other thing I'll say, if I go back to this slide, is that we added new symbols to the science actions to show which ones build on actions that were identified in the previous science action agenda. That's the building block symbol, oops, versus which actions are new, which we designated with the sunrise symbol. And then in terms of next steps, we're asking for the ISB's help in spreading the word about the availability and intent of the science action agenda. The SAA is already active in our request for applications for the 2022 California Sea Grant Delta Science Fellowship. We're preparing to launch a proposal solicitation for 2023 to also fund these science actions. And then our ongoing workshop synthesis projects and directed actions all are relevant to the science action agenda. And then I just want to acknowledge the tremendous effort put in by the whole collaborative science and peer review unit led by Henry DeBay. Rachel Klopfenstein was the project lead for the science action agenda, but it couldn't have been done without the help of all the staff that you see here. So I apologize for going a little bit over time. There was great discussion earlier, but I wanted to make sure to provide you with a complete summary of the revisions that were made in response to your excellent comments.
Okay, Laurel, thanks a lot. I must admit I have not read the new version yet. I'm waiting for my hard copy. And but it seems to me that you've made a tremendous number of changes in it. And my first reaction is that I really enjoyed your discussion of a vision for integration, which seems more like it should be part of the overall Delta Science plan, from which near-term action items are prioritized.
Yeah.
And the science act, if that is a vision for the Delta Science per se, then it seems to me that actions could be prioritized on what needs to be done now in order to take significant steps forward along that vision. I don't see that that's the way it was done. It was done sort of after the fact. But I'm wondering, so I guess the question is, as the science, in my view, as the science action agenda becomes more of a science strategy, because you've talked about broadening it and extending it and multiple agencies and multidisciplinary, it looks like it becomes more of the science plan. And how do you see those two melding together? How do you separate? I know they're not supposed to be separate, but it seems that actions are now and a science strategy is a broader goal.
I'm just chuckling, Steve, because we had a discussion at our program manager meeting yesterday that speaks 100% to what you just mentioned. It's a topic of really active discussion, and I think the latest ISB discussions on the science strategy have encouraged us to make this a priority, make these discussions a priority within the science program. As you all know, we are gearing up to update the Delta Science Plan, and these discussions are still really fresh, so I don't speak from any level of consensus, but one of the things that we are discussing is really making the science plan itself espouse the science strategy and succinctly state what the science strategy is, in line with this vision of integration and collaborative science needs in order to achieve the vision of one Delta, one science. And so, I don't have a good answer for you, Steve, other than to say your thinking is very much in line with ours right now. And this is something that we're going to discuss a lot more in the coming weeks and months.
Good, thanks. I see Tom and Bob. Tom?
I sort of gave Laurel a heads up on this question with an email yesterday, but one of the concerns I had when I was prepping for the meeting was there seems to be a lot of overlap now between the science needs assessment and the science action agenda, particularly in things like the co-laboratory and the forecasting modeling. And I'm going to ask the same question of you and Jay when we get to that discussion, the science needs assessment. But I'd like to ask Laurel what her perception is of what would be the best product of the science needs assessment. It's almost like it's been overtaken by what's happened in the development of the science action agenda. And maybe it needs a slightly different focus, a longer term or something like that. But anyway, I'd be interested in your view of what you could see would be a benefit of the science needs assessment.
Yeah, that's a really great question and a difficult question. I think this is a good example of how a product of the ISB's work has been influential in our own strategic planning. When I came on as Delta lead scientist, there were a lot of discussions on how to merge the longer term planning that's taking place with the science needs assessment with the shorter term focusing that the science action agenda is designed to accomplish. And as I just said, science actions within the science action agenda are designed to provide a foundation for tackling some of these longer term needs. So, I think it is very useful for the science needs assessment to produce a report of what that longer term vision is, because I think we still need to cite that in proposals to seek funding for collaboratories and proposals to seek additional funding for updated monitoring programs that could ultimately support forecasting for things like HABs. So I think it's really important to get that call to action for these longer term needs in writing, and to get that endorsed by DPIC, because that really carries a lot of weight. You know, one thing that might be helpful for the science needs assessment work group to think through is, you know, what might be an acceptable timeline or a suggested timeline for achieving these longer term visionary actions. So those are just some initial thoughts, Tom, but I think this is a great topic for ongoing discussion, and I look forward to that discussion later today too.
What about identifying new long-term projects?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Like in some of the earlier science needs assessment discussions I was involved in, I was really interested to hear the evolving consensus around what are the most important or the low-hanging fruit things that we can and should be forecasting. You know, it might be great for that group to also identify what are some of the most useful big problems that the community should coalesce around in a collaboratory. I think getting specific on some of those ideas would really be a call to action for the community, and is likely to prompt faster action on some of those topics.
Okay, Bob.
Thanks. Excuse me, Laura. I've got a kind of a cold today, but thank you for the presentation. It was really quite comprehensive and far-reaching in so many different ways. I have a kind of a practical concern, though, for you, where I'd like, I guess, to get some clarity on this. In reality, you have approximately $7 million a year over the next 5 years to accomplish some of the goals that you've set out. And I was wondering if you could be a bit more explicit about what you hope to accomplish in the next 5 years, because I think clearly you can set a lot of actions in motion, and especially the kinds of issues that you outlined in your presentation. They're issues that are going to go on for decades, most likely. But the 5 years of this agenda, if you could give us a better idea of what you really hope to accomplish at the end of those 5 years.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in several ways. I'm going to answer this as an individual lead scientist, and then I'll also answer this from a more, as more of a representative of the Delta Science Program. And so for the latter, I will say that in the science program, we feel that it's really important to provide broad funding calls to the community, because as you all know, academics often come in with different perspectives. They might not have on the same blinders that many agency scientists have on, that enable them to maybe catch important science priorities or topics that, you know, might not be on everyone else's radar. And so we want to provide these broad funding calls that are still relevant to management needs. I mean, that's really a main purpose of the Science Action Agenda, to align science with priority management needs. But then, you know, see what are the projects that we get. We want to fund the best of those projects after they go through a rigorous peer review process. I know that's kind of a non-answer. So I will say a few things that I intend to set the science program on a path to accomplish in the next 5 years. That might be outside these competitive solicitations, but very much in line with the Science Action Agenda. So I am committed to the development of a collaboratory, and, you know, tackling the salinity management challenge in a collaborative sense as a first application of the resources that we're building with the collaboratory. The science program is also we're committing a lot of resources right now into tackling harmful algal blooms and their impacts on human health through aerosolized toxins. Also to really understanding which are the, well, what triggers a harmful algal bloom, given that there are multiple drivers that influence their development. So really providing this system level understanding of what triggers harmful algal blooms so that they can be forecasted in the future. We're also committed to developing a monitoring strategy that's appropriate for HABs and would be foundational for forecasting as well. You know, there's a lot of examples right now of how we're working to update monitoring Delta-wide to ensure that it is sufficiently able to adapt to rapidly changing conditions, while also preserving our capability to maintain this long-term record. There's so many things, Bob. I'm struggling to answer your question succinctly because there are so many things that within this science action agenda that I think it is realistic to expect progress on in the next 5 years. Those are a few of the most burning examples, though, and so hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, that's helpful, Laurel. Thank you very much for that. And I was wondering if any of this is actually articulated in the documents as to, you know, what your priority areas might be for, you know, what you hope to accomplish in this 5-year program, as opposed to just setting kind of actions in motion that will be resolved sometime further down the road.
So we were very intentional about not further prioritizing amongst those science actions because we also want to recognize that priorities of different agencies are broad, and we want it to be comprehensive. I think this is where our adaptive management of the science action agenda also becomes really important. At the end of this 5 years, we will evaluate progress on these actions and identify remaining gaps, and we'll evaluate this whole process that we adopted this time to create this version of the science action agenda, including both our approach to co-production and then, you know, this approach that includes more science actions than the 2017 to 2021 science action agenda did. And we will assess whether that puts us in a place where we feel like we are making strong progress on particular areas and, you know, adequate progress across a broader set of areas, as opposed to like really drilling down to a few priority areas. So this is something that we'll continue to assess.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, I see a few more hands up, but I'm going to first do a time check. I forgot to mention our meeting is scheduled from 8 until 10, and then we're having a break and reconvening from 1 to 3 because of people's schedules and so forth. Does anyone have to leave exactly at 10 from the board? Okay, I'm also going to take the chair's prerogative and switch the agenda items out. And our next agenda item was designed to be a discussion on the outreach and communication of recent reviews. I'm going to move that to the end of the day, just before number 10, because I know someone has to leave at 2:30. So that is just more or less a reporting, which we could also do in an email. And the next item we'll talk about is the science needs assessment before our break. So with that said, we'll go to Jay and then Joe.
Yeah. Steve, I was going to suggest that we might move the science needs assessment until after the break. Is that possible?
Well, I was going to suggest we do it next because then we'll have at least half an hour for it. I think we originally had scheduled 20 minutes. If you're ready to go.
I will be more ready at 1. I want to have a discussion before then.
Okay, we can, yeah, let me think about that. Yes, and I'll figure out how to do it as Joe talks. Joe?
Yes, just a quick quick question from Laurel. Now, for the science needs assessment and science action agenda, I mean, you have, proposal calls going out, for important science questions. What is the outreach to local universities, except Davis, of course, they are very familiar with what's going on in Delta. The other crowd around there, San Francisco State, all the peripheral universities, do you have any type of interaction with them? Because there's a lot of talent there. Probably they don't know much about what's going on with the science program. Do you have any outreach effort, or is it worthwhile for you to give presentations in each one of them when you can find time? So that's my question.
Very much in line with our thinking, Joe. So just at a first cut, we do have an email list that reaches out to representatives at these different universities. I know that there is a plan that's now underway to reach out to particular departments among the local universities to see whether there is an interest in scheduling talks about the science action agenda. So there are a few other mechanisms as well. Just in the past year, we started a new Delta Science Program funding newsletter called the Delta Breeze. It's a quarterly newsletter in which we have highlighted the science action agenda as well as some of the work previously funded through the science action agenda. And so that Delta Breeze is distributed through the council's listserv. We're also in the process of having some discussions with comms on perhaps establishing a science-specific listserv, which I think could help us more effectively reach some of those academic communities. And then my Delta lead scientist Ask Me Anything was something I originally conceptualized as a way to help reach out to a broader audience. And, I was kind of channeling myself when I moved to California from the East Coast and wanted to learn a lot more about the Delta. It's hard to kind of break into a new science community if you're on the outside. And so one of the audiences I had in mind for that communication venue is early career scientists, students at the local universities who want to get involved in the Delta but might not know how to go about doing that. And so we do have a recent Delta lead scientist Ask Me Anything session that focused on the science action agenda, which is available on Instagram Live. So those are just a few of the examples of how we have done outreach and are planning to do outreach in the near future.
Jay, do you still have your hand up? You're on mute.
For a comment on this really nice presentation that Laurel's given. What you presented is a substantial upgrade and much more elaborate, intricate version of what the first science action agenda was that we looked at. And I think it lays out a very nice way of prioritizing or identifying actions for the solicited research programs that you were involved in. But my concern is that the solicited research, while important, is not, I think, even the majority of the science work that goes on for the Delta. That most of the science work is done by agencies, for agencies, by agencies, and their direct contractees outside of the solicitation. Yeah. What is it in the science action agenda that encourages the agencies to get together on some of the actions that cross the agency boundaries? So many of the things you mentioned, Salinity is quite a bit. There's a lot of real science needs across the agencies where basically one agency has expertise. And so that the science, the technology, the modeling, the capabilities that the community needs are really developed with the leadership of only one agency. What can we do to get away from that?
Yeah, I think the extensive process of co-production that Rachel and team embarked on is really a good first step at getting the community buy-in on the science actions. Some of those actions explicitly call for expanding co-production as an approach to addressing scientific questions. I'm encouraged by the science actions that refer to understanding institutional governance. But the other thing I want to say in response to your question is that I really see the Delta Science Plan as providing this roadmap for how to do collaborative science, priority collaborative science. And so, one of the topics of our ongoing discussions about how we're going to update the science plan involves how we are going to engage other agencies and get community adoption of the science plan in a way that mirrors community adoption of the science action agenda. So I agree with you, Jay, we're not there yet. And I appreciate all advice from the Independent Science Board on how we might get there. That's how we're thinking of it right now.
I like the rhetorical support that for these ideas of co-production and integration and much of the individual science items that are in the science action agenda, but how do you get from calling for these actions to actually getting these actions when the resources and the management of the science is so decentralized? I think it's really the major challenge that the science program has.
Yeah, and that's the big challenge of getting any science done in the Delta, right? Is it's polycentric governance, and I know Tanya and Mark LaBelle are working on this really complex social issue, and so we're going to be staying tuned to that research.
We've all been working on this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, to follow up on Jay's comment is that, of course, most of our reviews fall into and recommendations fall into that category by their very nature. They're multidisciplinary. They're certainly multi-agency, and so then how do you then get those agencies to work together to achieve those? And I think by the way the science action agenda was done this past year, you've fallen into that same, I don't want to say trap, but that same dilemma, in that I think one of the criteria you used to prioritize science actions were that they were multi-institutional, multi-agency in nature. That was a criteria. So therefore you don't get individual agency. If one agency wants to do one thing, it doesn't get a high priority. And I think, and that tends to generalize and strategize things. Let me give you an example. If I have a bunch of people in a room and I say, how many of you think working on salmon is important? And how many of you think working on Delta smelt? And how many of you think working on bass? And how many of you think working on a bluegill are important? You'll get individuals raising your hand. But if I say, how many of you think working on fish is important? All of those same individuals are going to raise their hand. So then working on fish all of a sudden becomes more important than working on salmon or smelt or so forth. And so it does tend to generalize, which does tend to make actions be more strategic and comprehensive. And that falls in line with the way our reviews, sort of the nature of our reviews, recommendations as well. So the challenge of how do you get agencies to take those on as priorities is one brought up in the Hastings report. Maybe identify individual agencies, which I don't think was done in the science action agenda. Anyway, Lisa, we're obviously going to have to rearrange the schedule during the break. Lisa.
Sorry.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Lisa.
Thanks, my turn to do that. Just to pile on to this particular conversation, this is the benefit of having some social scientists on the board and some people who think about how institutions make decisions, is that there really is some science around this. And so, you have to create the capacity for a collaboration. And maybe this can be part of the science needs assessment, Jay, that we could add this in. There isn't a lot of social science so far in there. And I do see this same need, and I put my hand down earlier because Bob's question overlapped so much with mine, which is, how do you actually get so much of this done and not let this beautiful vision that you've laid out, which I really like a lot, how do you keep that from actually leading to bite-sized chunks that you can accomplish? And so I think these are definitely issues we should try to work on as a board.
I love that idea. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up, so any public comment on this?
There is a public comment, but Jay, do you want to finish your thought?
Yeah, I was gonna say capacity for interagency work is important, but the way you get capacity is with expectations of it and incentives for it, which has to do with money, basically. This social science is important, but I think some of these social science insights we all know. And that's the hard part.
A famous Sea Grant director once said, the simplest way to get a bunch of people to work together is walk into the room and throw a pile of money on the table, and they will begin to start working together immediately. So I think we can now go to Deidre.
Yes, Deirdre, you have the ability to mute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation for providing your.
Yeah, thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And there has been a real polarization of attitudes about collaborative science since the voluntary agreement framework was announced. And I was getting some information to the lead scientist about it. And I've been looking at the social science literature. There's an enormous amount of research right now on political polarization and because of the Trump administration and in recent developments in a lot of democracies, not just the US. And seeing that it applies to polarization of attitudes around Delta stressors and around science issues. And it's going to be a challenge going forward because the voluntary agreement science framework proposes something that's driven entirely by the water contractors and agencies. And there's no governance or unlike the CalFed, a collaborative science program, which included NGOs and fishing groups and Delta groups on an equal footing. This new plan doesn't. And it also, the CalFed science program and the Delta Reform Act vision, which carried that forward, had oversight by an independent science board as which goes kind of like adult supervision for the collaboration and ensuring that best available science was used in spite of political pressures, isn't institutionalized. And so it's going to be a challenge to get the kind of funding for those collaborative efforts. And the stakeholders I work with, when they saw the $100 million for increased interagency collaboration, were concerned that this could be used for the voluntary agreement science program. And there's an absolute opposition to funding for the voluntary agreement framework because it's based on a science model which is not too dissimilar for the oil and gas industry taking over research on climate change and climate mitigation. So trying to find a thoughtful way to write this up and cite the appropriate literature, because I know it's a very controversial topic, but I think it's something to think about as you plan. And I'll be trying to get you some information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move item 5 to the end of the day, and that is on the discussion of our communication and outreach activities, and or turn it into a report, a one-page summary, because it's mainly informational items. I think we're going to move on to future reviews and try and end this at 10:30. Hopefully that's will work. We'll start the future reviews and get as far as we can by 10:30 and then break till 1. Somebody have another comment? Okay. Future reviews, item number 7. We're currently in the process of exploring future review topics based on our virtual planning public retreat and recent presentations. So I think the first one will come up is to, see if I got my note. We're going to report out on any progress made to scope out these future reviews, talk about what additional information is needed to move forward with these review topics, and whether or not to continue to move forward on any one of these. And report leads will report out on their thoughts and facilitate the discussion with the board. We'll talk first about subsidence reversal, and Tom wants to lead that discussion.
All righty. We've had a meeting, can't remember, I think it was last week, yeah. Things are blending together. And we're making progress. What we're focused on right now is sort of implementing the recommendation in Lauren's report that emphasized getting input from stakeholders before getting too far into the review. And so we're hoping that will inform the kinds of questions we'll be asking. And that's turned out to be an interesting problem by itself, because as I intimated earlier with one of the other questions to the communications folks, there's so many stakeholders that it's almost overwhelming. And I don't think for these reviews we want to invest the amount of time that would be required to talk to everybody before it. So you have to be selective in these, and going from the broad list of stakeholders, which we tried to compile to a manageable list, has turned out to be a question or a challenge. The other thing is the number of briefing groups you want to talk to in the different things. And we've gotten to the point now where I think we have narrowed it down to what's a reasonable number of briefing groups, and we've identified the subject matter that we want to address in the briefing groups, and we're in the process of organizing those. The other thing that I think is becoming clearer as we pursue this is subsidence reversal in a way is too narrow a topic, that it's a broader problem. It's really re-wetting of the Delta soils, and there are programs underway in the Delta already, and we saw it on our field trip that involved either just managing water tables to reduce subsidence, or actually reverse it, as we saw in the field trip. And so we're sort of gravitating, I think, just naturally, and with the briefing groups, is to look a little more broadly than just subsidence and look at it as a re-wetting problem. And if you stop and think about it, that's inevitable for the Delta. The Delta is either going to fail or it's going to be re-wet and stabilized, at least at a point that it's functional. But buried within that are several important scientific questions, and we can almost see the workshop itself now breaking down into the sort of 4 issues. One being this subsidence reversal and stabilization. That's still an important aspect of the Delta rehabilitation, but it's not the whole story. On our field trip, Steve Deverell talked about the challenge of the levee stability. As the subsidence on the islands gets worse, the stability of the levees gets, well, it degrades, and it would just become a very costly thing to repair all those levees. So stabilizing the land surface in the Delta is important for Delta levees. And then greenhouse gas emissions, as many of you know, is an important aspect of wetlands, that when you drain them, they emit greenhouse gases, and when you re-wet them, they sequester a lot of it. And a lot of the agricultural carbon that is in play is actually involves wetlands worldwide. So having a session on that, and then it's very clear that how we manage this solution of re-wetting through adaptive management and governance is going to be critical. So right now, our focus is, just to wrap up, our focus is on getting the questions of the stakeholder clear, and then we'll burrow a little more deeply into those 4 scientific issues, which would be the workshop. And my thinking is that what we're going to try and do is maybe have a half-day session on each one of those topics, and then try and develop recommendations for the report right there at the workshop, because we're going to have the experts in the room at that time. So that's where we are.
So Tom, at what point, it sounds like you definitely want to go ahead, and at what point do you see a prospectus being written? Because that kind of it's sort of what you were talking about. It sort of outlines what the purpose is and what the science you'll be evaluating and who the audience is and what the process is for the review, in this case, whatever 2-day workshops. And because that's the point at which the board looks at that and says, okay, we're officially as a board sanctioning that to go forward as a review. It also provides an opportunity formally for the public to have a comment on that. Do you see that? That's still coming down the pipe sometime, or?
Yeah, probably the June meeting will be too early because we need to complete the briefing groups. We have 3 more briefing groups we've identified. I think we've identified the people we want to talk to in those briefing groups, but we haven't set up the briefing groups. And I think just from a functional purpose, it's going to probably take till the July meeting. And my hope would be that the prospectus would be fairly easy to write at that point, because the questions would be clear both in terms of the stakeholders and the science.
Okay, that's just good for us to know. And in terms of prospectus too, remember those are it's a living document, and we put it out there specifically, at least for 30 days, asking for public comments so that we can modify our approach or objectives or whatever as a result of that public comment. So we don't want it locked in stone by the time it goes out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges here. We can't talk to all of the stakeholders, so that the hope would be that something we've overlooked or missed would get covered during that review process when the prospectus is out. But hopefully the prospectus would be a better prospectus because we have talked to the stakeholders.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions for Tom or the group? Okay, the next one on the list is food webs. And I think Lisa and I have been largely taking the lead on this, and really to remind folks, we are planning to do a workshop as well to talk about some of the key scientific issues. And I think to date, and look at available tools for looking at food webs and so forth. And to date, I guess more or less looking at the literature, talking about names of possible people that are doing things that would be worthwhile to bring to that workshop. But I think we still need to do some more thinking and discussion about narrowing the focus of what the purpose of that workshop would be, and go from there. Lisa, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to make sure, one of the goals we've identified is to make sure that you can link up the fish models to other things going on. Like, so Laurel mentioned it during her report out about linking to salinity management and the effects on food webs. I think that's kind of the gap that we're evaluating. And so, but it does sound as though this might overlap a bit with goals of the collaboratory. So we should probably have at least one conversation with Laurel to see who else we should be talking to about that.
Any other thoughts? And again, I do want to stress, I think we're thinking about food webs, not necessarily food resources. And because there's been a lot of work on how restoration improves food resources, i.e. zooplankton. And that's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about the interaction of critters. And it's a food web process. Okay, the next is an update on hydrodynamic and water quality modeling. And this proposal was originally put forward by Joe back in 2020, I believe. And he was going to look at recent reports and work of the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee and report back on.
Yeah, so in fact, Edmund reminded me yesterday, so I had time to go and look at it and carefully review it. It looks like it has been done quite well because there is an integrated modeling steering committee, which basically handle this aspect of modeling now. And they're at a quite advanced stage. And also this Tetra Tech report they had, it had the modeling tool and modeling best practices, the toolboxes, the technical solutions, and also they have a synthesis report. So in the synthesis reports, they have recommendations where to go in the future. So I think another report might be a little bit too much at this time after looking at the whole product series they have. So my recommendation is to advance other reviews and also for us to maybe have one or two panel discussion probably from the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee, whoever we can invite, and give us an update on what's the status at this time to get a little bit of idea. Well, I didn't know about all these things till recently. So a lot of things going on. So my recommendation is just to have one or two presentations and get an update at this time. And with time, then we can keep a track, or the board can keep a track, and some future days to take up the show. Not immediately.
That sounds good. Edmund, can you add that as an action item that we would try and get an update on that?
Yes.
Okay, the other two topics we have been discussing is environmental flows, which is now, I guess, evolved into future conditions. And there's also one put forward by Lisa and Tanya on climate change forecasting and scenario development science. And I think there's been some ongoing discussions about whether or not to merge those or evolve something different. And do any of you, Bob or Tanya or Lisa, want to provide any update, or you want to put that off to the next meeting?
Shall I weigh in for the group here? So we did have a conversation about the ability to merge those, and I think we just need more time. We see some overlaps, but it wasn't necessarily a perfect fit of all the goals. So it's still a question that we'd like to explore, and we should have more information at the next meeting.
And I would agree with Lisa, is that we do need a little bit more time. And Lisa and Tanya were part of the phone call, but since then, Edmund had sent me some material about potential amendments being made to the Delta Science Plan. And I had asked for them for another reason, but it was made interesting reading for me because these potential amendments to the plan actually discuss functional flows quite a bit. And I was not aware of that, that they were so explicitly mentioned in these amendments. I haven't had time to really scope them out to the level that I feel like I need to. And so I need a little bit more time to look into that and see if we are perhaps coming full circle again. coming back to really discussing functional flows or e-flows in a more direct way. And if indeed these amendments are adopted for the plan, then there may be some really good benefits of having the ISB take a look at least some components of these amendments in more detail. But I'll have to get back to you on that. So perhaps June would be a good time to have a fuller discussion on this.
Okay, thanks. I think we've finished that that agenda topic. Anybody else have anything else on future reviews?
You have a public comment.
Okay, let's go with the public comment.
So it's from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. So there was a UC Davis and other researchers task force on lessons learned from the 2012 to 2016 drought. And John Durand gave a report to the Delta Stewardship Council in 2017, in which he that one of their key recommendations was that we do drought scenario planning, and the environmental groups are this is a huge issue, and because if we keep doing temporary urgency change petitions in the Delta, then essentially taking water that's dedicated to ecosystem flows and put it towards health and safety needs, the species will go extinct. And it's actually a problem all over the state. There is a proposal to have a statewide water master. This does tie into the water unavailability analysis for the water board is using, assumes that no natural flow needs to be left in the Delta, that it can be completely diverted by all the current water permits, and the only water left is stored water released by the projects. So there's some profound management issues that are sort of embedded in the water rights system. And this relates to the food web effort, in that we looked back at the history and discovered that the first time an major change in the food web was found was in the 1976 to 77 drought. And I'm going to get you, it's in an old interagency ecological program report that the IEP unfortunately no longer has, but we were able to locate a copy. But there was a collapse in striped bass recruitment, and it was traced by the IEP to a change in the food web. So there is evidence that some of the changes in the food web were related to water development and changes in water diversion patterns. So it's just all I can give you in 3 minutes, but I hope to send some more information. Thank you.
Thanks. Certainly, we'd be happy to see that paper report dealing with food webs. Okay, I think we're ready to take a break. We reconvene at 1 o'clock. We're going to start off with the science needs assessment, talk about our response to the Hastings report, and then talk about future meetings, which will include a more in-depth discussion of preparation for the EIR review. So we're officially broke. I shouldn't say that, but we're breaking till 1 o'clock.
Okay, we are recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
Okay, welcome back to the part 2 of the today's meeting of the Independent Science Board, and we're going to move on to, for those following the agenda, to item number 6, which is a discussion of the science needs assessment. And Jay, you're going to lead that off.
Let's go through this. Thank you very much. The last time we met, we had a little bit of an outline for this. And my hope at that time was to get a draft out to a few people before then. Now such a draft exists, and I expect that it will be improved a little bit from our discussion. It's already been improved from the discussion we had earlier.
One of these.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. It was very good to see in the science action agenda presentation by Laurel Larsen that some of the ideas from the science needs assessment discussions have percolated into the science action agenda, and similarly some of the ideas that are coming in and out of the science action agenda are percolating into the science needs assessment thinking. So we've got this outline. We talked a little bit about the process of coming up with a draft report for the science needs assessment last time. Within about a day of this meeting, I'll send out to, or Edmund will send out to most of the members that have expressed interest in this particular activity, an early draft. And then when we get some feedback from that, I can turn this around and we can have a draft, I think, that'll be ready to go out to the full board. My thinking is that about that same time, we'll also send it out to some other folks that were involved in the process before this draft, involved in some of the committees and the science needs assessment workshops and committees we had beforehand. And we'll see what their comments are, and then we'll just roll it along from there. But I'm getting more comfortable with it all the time. The discussion we had last session was very useful on how do we get agencies to work well together. And I think probably something that we should include in this science needs assessment is the idea of having a Delta plan that is in fact a plan for all of the major Delta science agencies, not a plan that is reflecting just the Stewardship Council science programs view of what can be done. And if that's done through DPIC, it might be a more efficacious approach. That's most of what I have for now.
Thanks, Jay. I have just 2 thoughts from today's conversations too. One, it seems like, as you mentioned, that many of the ideas that we had in the science needs assessment have now been adopted by the science action agenda. If you recall, when we first started this process of both of these things, we're starting about the same time. It was almost a clear separation of the 2 processes and the short-term versus the strategic needs. And it seems the science needs assessment has evolved to be more encompassing and including many of our recommendations. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I think Laurel said in many respects, this is a reflection of how board recommendations get taken up and put into the science strategy. And I would think we might want to put a section that exactly points that out. You know, that these particular recommendations that we have in writing already that have come out of the science needs assessment have already been adopted by the Science Action Agenda, and now in one way or another are part of the Delta Science Strategy. And we endorse and encourage further work on those. That's point one. And the second point is there are many things that also in the science needs assessment which provide more of a way to trigger or let's say trigger interagency collaboration, the forecasting side of it in particular. And I think that that's something then we can say, we can emphasize, because we go back and report directly to DPIC on what we've done and say, now that that's stuff over here has been taken care of, here's what we think is some further steps that could really move this effort forward, bring it back to the context of what triggered all this too, which is the rapid environmental change, and loop that back in and say what could DPIC specifically do next on that, and steer our recommendations to them, because the report goes to them. And that goes beyond, as you said, not just the science program funding, but it's the really individual agency collaboration and things that need to go forward.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is also happening, not just stuff within the Science Action Agenda, is the at the last CLEMF meeting, there was a very nice set of presentations by the Bureau of Reclamation, who's putting together essentially a set of tools and data sets and methods for water temperatures and flows for the Central Valley project, which is really important for managing environmental operations for those big projects. So I think quite a few things are sort of lining up under this umbrella that we're trying to construct of using forecasting as a way of integrating the science. Now, in this particular case, one of the gaps is that the Bureau is a little bit out ahead of the other agencies that are involved in the water supply system operations. And so, but this provides an opportunity to maybe bring some of the other agencies along in this kind of an effort and to make it a multi-agency program. And I think we're going to see that in a lot of cases. We have some other cases, such as in Delta Salinity, where the Department of Water Resources is pretty far ahead of most of the other agencies in terms of their forecasting activities, but it'll make their forecasting activities much more useful if they sort of bring in the other agencies to help them out and make sure the applications are really relevant for a broader range of concerns than just DWRs.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, I want to thank Steve for asking the question I was going to ask. You did add some color to it that I think was pretty important. My concern, as I indicated in the morning session, is that in some sense, events have overtaken us when we started from where we were when we started the needs assessment. And I think pointing out the fact that it has been incorporated in the seismic or science action plan, as Steve pointed out, is an excellent idea. But I wonder if we shouldn't step back and ask ourselves if we shouldn't be taking a longer term view of it. I know the forecasting gave us a nice coherent program, but we can make the point that you just did, Jay, that people are starting to do it. The action plan recommends it, and make a big deal out of that piece, but fundamentally step back and ask, what are the big issues for the Delta? And as an example, as I've gotten more into this, what started as subsidence reversal, I realize re-wetting the organic soils it's just inevitable, because otherwise the problem just continues to get worse. And so we really need to focus on those kind of problems, and trying to identify a series of those, I think, would be useful to the people who are dealing with the operational side of the Delta.
That's a really good point, Tom, for us to identify some of the longer term problems and solutions that might not really have been focused on.
Any other comments or Jay, do you need anything from us, or are you going to wait?
Well, the discussions earlier this morning were already very useful. The reminder that one of our biggest gaps and one of our biggest problems is how do we get the agencies to actually work together as opposed to just talk together? And getting the talk together is an important first step, but to actually get them to really engage with functional products that provide insights for the community is the harder part.
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, while we're on that topic, Jay, what I was thinking of earlier when I said there's a science around this is that it's not just enough to have one incentive or one RFP, or it really needs to be a continuous cultural change. And so we could potentially look at, either through case studies or just some of the scientific research about what leads to these things sustaining. I'm doing some investigation right now for the Chesapeake Bay program, and one of the things I've learned is that you can basically just create a space, regular meetings. I know everybody needs more meetings, like they need a hole in the head, but there has to be some incentive to make these meetings useful to folks. But when they learn from each other, they tend to be engaged and want to come back to the meetings. And so if you create a learning environment and a fun environment, not too boring, these are some of the things I've learned can work. So it's just the beginning of a conversation, but we could try to inject a little bit more of that institutional science and networking strategies.
That's good. I think that's what you're saying is correct. I mean, certainly there are examples of estuaries that have much more of a common science program than what we have here. And Chesapeake Bay is probably, certainly among them. Tanya?
I was just going to add on to what Lisa said and reinforce her point. I think there's been some good kind of syntheses across the literature that's looked at collective action amongst, agencies and organizations that are working in the various watersheds, and there is some good kind of research that's already been done that we can draw from. Lisa raised some of the factors that are important, but there's other things that we need to think about, trust building and some of the challenges to collective action that arise when you're dealing with different missions and different types of goals. So, but there's good research out there. I'm happy to help with that.
That would be wonderful. Either you can send me some citations, a couple of citations now, make sure I introduce them, or when you get a document, feel free to add the discussion that you think is needed. Tom?
This is just an informational question. When the science needs assessment started, governance was a big piece of it, but there's not I'm curious what's happened to that effort.
Right now, there's in the current draft, there's an appendix that has some discussion, but mostly lists, organized table of different approaches to organizing cross-agency, multi-interest science efforts. And there's a few ideas in the current draft about how to get the agencies to organize across agencies to accomplish science tasks. Forecasting is one of those. Developing a common science plan that actually has more authority than the current science plans we have for the Delta.
Okay, now we currently, I don't know whether you could call it a commitment, but I'll call it that, a commitment to a collaboratory model.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas that's discussed in the appendix. Okay. And I'm going to ping Laurel Larsen and see if she can get me a 1-page or 2-page version of the collaboratory proposal that we can feature in an appendix and discuss in the body.
Because my concern that, like I expressed earlier, is that in a way our effort has gotten kind of dated in the way that the science action agenda sort of went ahead and has implemented some of the things.
I think that's a useful, foreshadowing of some of the bigger issues that the science needs assessment really should address.
Yeah.
So I think it's all good.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to help us avoid looking dated.
Jay, did you want me to speak?
You could if you like. I'm just saying that I'd like to include, at least as an appendix in the science needs assessment, a very short, like a couple of page appendix that the kind of appendix that we might expect a few of the agency heads or deputy directors to actually read, not a 40-page appendix.
Yeah, I could definitely contribute to that based on some of the efforts that you're involved in right now.
Yeah. I've seen paragraphs on this subject and several pages, but I think we need something a little bit toned for an agency head audience.
Yeah, I'm actually planning on drafting a 1 to 2 pager by the end of the month anyway, for information sharing purposes. And so I think that could be used here in some form.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
I had another point I wanted to make that I just wasn't quick enough about. Building on what Tom said earlier about the more long-term issues, I wonder sometimes whether, there's the folks that really understand some risky element of the system, like I'm thinking of the levees in particular. It's a relatively small group that really understand those well enough to model them or understand them. But I wonder if there's some benefit to be had in bringing in outside experts to see if they're using, the best tools in the toolbox for doing what they need to do. And I guess I'm thinking that there could be more of a strategy to the SNA in terms of looking for the really weak links that really deserve more science attention. And I don't know, I'm a little nervous about the levees right now. Just kind of thinking that might be an area, but I don't know enough to really prioritize here. But yes, something that so that we wouldn't necessarily try to be all encompassing, but say maybe there's some places that are under researched or could use some particular help given what we see right now for the long term. For maybe it's not your immediate need. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think it's this document is supposed to be looking at the long term, but I'm not sure we want to wander into being a long-term science action agenda, but I think there's elements of what you and Tom say that are really important for this kind of a discussion.
I just want to follow up again on Tom's comment about being outdated, and I totally get that viewpoint. And I think that we've had the discussion, do we still need this report at this stage? And I guess my thought on this is that, the science needs assessment was a process. It wasn't a final report with specific recommendations. And we had, as you know, many workshops and seminar series with 80 or more people in each one of those. And during the time when the science action agenda and other activities were ongoing and being developed, and many of those ideas have been acted upon. So I think that it's okay to declare victory, and say that many of the things that came up as very specific recommendations, collaboratory came up specifically by Peter as a recommendation in one of our seminar series, and the group adopted it and moved forward. I don't know if we've presented back to DPIC and progress, but we certainly made presentations throughout this at various locations. So I think it's okay to say to DPIC, you initiated this process, we ran through it, and it was a great success with a number of people, a number of ideas, the reports, and now many of these things have been incorporated into the not only the science strategy, but agency activities and future workshops and are being handled, and declare victory and say that now, given that, some of the next immediate steps forward are, and we can go beyond what we originally had scoped out. And I think full board activity on that would be a good way to do this, because we've always talked about what's the science needs assessment quote recommendations or actions versus, or in collaboration with what the board's role in that might be. The board can take on any role it wants after that. So we've got this moving forward. So we as a board can now say, okay, given that, we think the following things, based on those results, should be some of the next immediate steps forward. So I think there's a way to couch that, Tom, your comments into a positive statement forward, and then move it and push it towards that next step. Virginia.
So I agree with what you just said, Steve, and emphasizing that addressing or identifying science needs is a process, and that maybe this isn't a living document, but it will always be a process to continue to address those science needs. And part of that is identifying risks, and maybe not calling out levees as the big risk, but they're giving it as an example of risks that will come up in the future. And in the future, looking out for those new risks, because we are in changing times.
Very good. Well, I think this gives me enough to chew on to update this document, which is already improved from where it was this morning. To me, the big emphasis that where we can add something that the other science planning documents have not been as successful is in how do you forge effective coalitions, effective integration, rather than just making lists of things to do. Of topics to put out for bid, for example. And you could move from there to actual interagency collaboration in the technical sense. Okay, but anyway, hopefully within about a week or two, I will have something out to everybody. Well, it's to a subset of folks, but there'll be something to discuss at the next meeting.
So maybe you could take that need for interagency collaboration and the need to look for risks as something together to say, there could be quarterly meetings to look at the future, and one might be on identifying risks. Another one might be on identifying new tools and how they can address circumstances. Another one might be, as new data comes in, how do you use that to modify what is going on? Because the word flexibility, this has to be flexible, and that accounts for new risks, new data, new understanding. That's always going to be happening.
Yep. The endless frontier.
Okay, Jay, thanks for taking the lead on this. And by the way, thanks for being our Sacramento representative today. So
this is a nice, better view here than my office on campus.
All right, Edmund, any public comments on this?
There are none.
Okay, we're going to move on then to what was originally item number 8, which is the response to the Delta Science Program assessment of the Delta ISB. I think, Lisa, you're taking the lead on this.
I am, yeah. So you have this draft letter that we did in your packet. I know we've talked quite a bit about the Hastings et al. Report as we've been reading it. And so we created a response. I'll just briefly summarize it. We thank the council for their thoughtful review. It was great that they identified all the products, or not all of them, but almost all the products that had come out of the board, and really showed that people demonstrated the value that people place in having independent, credible science review. And it was nice to see how other agencies were using our products. There are 4 main themes to our responses. We'd like to see increased integration of our efforts with the council and really all stakeholders. And So we've just raised the idea that we want to discuss ways to create a clear path by which our recommendations are integrated into strategy documents. So that's already been coming up today. I think we've seen some nice uptake, but as well as some concerns. So I think the question is, do we want to codify that a bit more, or at least have a discussion about how to clarify what that process is? We talk about changing the process by which we select and conduct reviews. And part of that is more meaningfully engaging stakeholders, as Tom talked about, with subsidence in honing the questions, but also one step back in terms of where is our expertise most needed? You know, where can we help not be redundant? And stakeholders had a big theme about asking for practical and applicable recommendations. And we want to work toward that goal, but we also want to balance it with our mission to promote strategies that increase effectiveness, but may be initially difficult to do. And so they may not appear practical necessarily in the short term, but they're possible with long-term effort. And then finally, the fourth theme is enhancing our communications and using different products. And we've really already discussed that today too. So the letter is really a shorthand version of the meeting we've been having today. And so that's really the gist of it. We didn't go into too much detail. We really hope to just initiate appropriate conversations but acknowledge that we heard what was said in terms of how we can improve, and we're working on that. So at this point, we're looking for a motion to approve or modifications. First, let's just discuss if anyone has any proposed modifications based on your reading of the letter. Steve?
Of course, I'm going to make, I like the 4 thematic reviews. So from a content point of view, I think those are fine. And I apologize. I know I've had an opportunity to edit this, and I failed to do so, so I'm going to do it now. I would change some of the wording a little bit. Let's go with your first point, integration. I'm not sure we want to integrate our activities with the council, you know, or frankly, state and federal agencies. Or maybe there's another word for that. But I think we want to, you know, maybe integration of our products and recommendations into council activities or into the agencies and so forth. It's not that we want to integrate ourselves more with the council. And maybe it's a fine point, but I think it's a point that people might perk up to if they hear we're integrating our activities with the council. I think we want to integrate to make sure that our recommendations and activities and products are integrated into council and program strategies and processes and so forth, that our stuff gets integrated in that. And certainly further on, we can talk about communication and so forth, but that word bothers me enough that I would argue against that word. And I think when we talk about, we would like to see our reviews more formally, and you say that later, you do say we would like to see our reviews be more structurally integrated into the Delta Science strategy. I think that's fine. It's kind of that, use of that word is fine there, but I don't know that we want to be more integrated. The second item was talking about changing our process to collect engaging stakeholders and so forth. I think I would, you know, restate that this has been a continual goal of ours and a continually evolving process that we have undertaken. You know, we instituted 2 pages, we instituted a prospectus, we've instituted a number of things to improve and enhance our stakeholder engagement in a sense, and that we will continue to do that. We will continue to improve it even further, but we're not changing the way we do things. We are improving on a process that we've been going on for 10 years. So it's a little bit different. It's not that we didn't do it, it's that we were continually improving, and there's need for more of that. And again, then the third comment has to do with with how closely our recommendations are specified to agencies, particular agencies. You know, I think I would say it'd be useful to do that in certain cases. In certain cases, we have made specific recommendations for specific agencies or entities, but moving in too much in that direction gives us I would disagree that that's an important thing that we must do. I think it's going to be recommendation specific, and if there are agencies that we think should take the lead on, we should state so. And but I don't know that we want to make any kind of a change that says this is how we do our recommendations. If I look at the science action agenda, for example, I'm not sure any of those have specific agencies listed there, and I'm not sure we ought to make a point to go down that path. I think we need to go make a point to recognize that's an option, and to take advantage of it if it's to enhance a response to a recommendation, if it's appropriate to do so. If there's a clear and identified group or agency that is most appropriate for that, we will make every effort to make sure we list those, but not to change our reviews in a way that would be a priority way of encapsulating the reviews. So I think that the same points are just some wording in here that to clarify what we're saying.
Okay, so yeah, how you describe it was really the intent, but perhaps it didn't come across as well as it could. So how about if we just add something like, instead of saying we agree that increasing the specificity of recommendations will be useful, we would say that increasing the specificity of recommendations will be used where appropriate, or something like that, will be developed in some cases, but that we will also be looking to create more general directional advice, something like that, not directional, but something more like big picture advice.
I think we will make every effort to identify lead agencies to take actions on recommendations if it's appropriate. If there are lead agencies, something like that. But the word "if appropriate," or "if useful," those kinds of qualifiers should be put in there rather than more of the blanket statement. So anyway, I would restate that I think what I've said is more, doesn't change the content so much, maybe a little bit, but more of the editing. So
yeah, those are all helpful. Yeah. Okay. The only reason I was trying to get to a solution is that we could still move to approve the language if we can say how we want to adapt the language. So anyway, we can go there next. Joe, go ahead, please.
Thanks for doing this. I kind of felt that when I looked at it, across the board, that I got the feeling that we are not doing some of these things, but we do. So it's really enhancing what we do in view of Hastings report. So I kind of like to see a little bit of a verbiage there that many of these things are already happening. For example, that we are partnering with Delta Science Program and Council in future communication planning, but we are doing this, but it has to be enhanced per the report. That's the kind of feeling I want to give, that we are doing it, many of these, but not the best way, but that kind of feeling, if you can put a little verbiage there. Right? Thanks.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, that it's not really recognizing that it's a process of continuous improvement, and we'll be sure to acknowledge that we weren't completely ignorant of these ideas, just need to keep improving. Yeah, great.
Yeah, and I like the way Joe said it, because I think I wouldn't think the Hastings report gave us anything new to do. It just to do more of what you're doing and possibly tweak how you're doing it. But it wasn't, oh, now we got to do this. I don't think I heard that. The one thing, again, I'm not sure. I think it's worth mentioning that, like Joe said, that we've already started some of the processes, like calling in lead agencies to tell us what the science strategy is about and how we might be able to how we could help them. The other thing which we've kind of initiated already is to come up with our own communication and stakeholder engagement strategy. And maybe that's worth pointing out, that we've taken the steps to start that, so that we would be able to improve our stakeholder engagement by actually having a strategy that we would incorporate into our own guidance. That's something very specific, I think. They said we need to do more of that, so why not come up with a strategy? We started coming up with a strategy, and that maybe we ought to mention that.
Okay. I do, though, want to, having read the report, I do think there really was a feeling that sometimes recommendations can be too vague or too general to be directly used. And so I don't think we should just totally brush that off of, yeah, we know, we've been doing it and we're going to get better. I do think they are asking for a little bit of a change from past operations. And that is, less stuff that we don't really know how to implement and more stuff that we can see a path to implement is what I heard. So I agree that we should acknowledge that we have tried to do some of these things, but I do also see a call for more than a tweak.
Well, then maybe we need it.
One of the things that we have troubles with is most of us are not from around here, and even those of us that are from around here, we're not in deep with all the agencies to know enough to precisely target and precisely communicate the targeting of those kind of recommendations. So I think what it calls for perhaps is more of an effort in the middle and later stages of our reviews to have conversations with the agencies before maybe when the drafts exist, so that we talk to some of the agencies in a little bit more depth during that draft to finalization phase, to make sure that we really articulate some specific recommendations that the agencies will understand and perhaps, and likely in many cases, will find them useful in furthering the accomplishment of those things, which quite often they're things that they would like to do anyway. They're just having trouble getting their management to understand it as well. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I think those are really important points, Jay. Like, we don't want to get into weeds where we just don't have the expertise. And I think
but there's a time in the review where we might accumulate a few of those weeds.
Yeah.
So that we can better communicate and better articulate and actually better understand how our review can be useful.
Right, and talk not just only to the agencies, but to broad stakeholders who have an interest in how the agency manages things.
Right, that's right. And some of the middle managers that are going to be stuck with trying to implement this stuff, if we can convince them of it.
Yeah, Tanya.
Yeah, I would just reemphasize that point that you and Jay were just making, and maybe in how we describe this in the letter, we do need to, in the section that talks about our efforts to kind of enhance stakeholder engagement, one of the ways we want to do that is with an eye toward, developing potentially actionable recommendations. And that's not the only way we want to do that, but that is one of the ways. So that piece on our efforts towards enhancing stakeholder engagement, I think, is tightly linked with the recommendations piece. And somehow we can reflect that in the letter, I think.
And I am hoping that our perspective could be one of more of a holistic perspective where not that we would get into the weeds, but we could look across agencies and think about how they may, I don't want to say integrate, given our different, our previous comment, but how they may learn from and share from what's going on maybe elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. I think that we have that role as well. And that's why the paragraph was saying something about balancing that, but yeah, not sure it's as articulate as it should be. Okay, well, we have quite a few comments. I'm not able to quickly come up with solutions to all these comments right now. So yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Go ahead. Tom, you're muted.
I just wanted to say I appreciated the brevity of the letter, and you've gotten a lot of comments, but I'd strongly recommend that it not get much longer. Certainly stick to 2 pages like you did.
Yeah, folks have enough to read. But this conversation is helpful. They're hearing us have this conversation too. So our intent is good. Oh, you would, Jay, please go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept this letter, subject to minor modifications to collect the nuances that have been expressed at this meeting.
Second, Virginia seconds. All right, all those in favor, can we just raise hands? Does it need to be a voice vote, Steve?
I think we have to go roll call vote on a thing. That's what my notes say.
Roll call vote, okay. If you have the names handy, do you want to just go in order of your list?
Okay, I got it right here. Roll call vote. Brandt, aye. Virginia.
Yes.
Joe. Joe Fernando.
Joe, you're muted. Oh, Joe might have taken a little break. Okay.
Joe Fernando's thinking about it. Tom.
Aye.
Tanya.
Aye.
Jay.
Aye.
Bob.
Yes.
Lisa.
Aye.
So I guess we have, I don't know if Joe's on the line or not, but I think you have certainly a majority.
Okay, so the motion passes. We will work probably more than maybe Steve and I can work on changing this wording and getting it in shape. Thank you all.
We will disintegrate it.
Thank you all for the good discussion.
Okay, any public comment on this?
There are none.
Okay, I'm going to jump to item number 9, which is normally one of our last items, which is preparation for the upcoming Delta ISB meetings, because we have some issues to talk about with respect to that. Our next meeting is, barring any quote unquote uptick in COVID, is intended to be a face-to-face meeting on June 8th, 9th, and 10th. And we start out day 1 on the 8th with some pre-meeting staff briefings during the earlier part of the day, but the meeting starts formally at 2 o'clock. So when you're making your schedule, this is a formal start of the meeting, and at 2:05 we'll have a Delta Conveyance Project EIR update. So that's the one. We hopefully all of you can make it for that, because that's will help set the stage for our review of the EIR. I'll come back to that in a minute. And that afternoon we will get a presentation, and we'll talk about our work planning and set the stage for doing the EIR review. The day 2 on the 9th will be our full day of business meetings. So the standard sorts of presentations and so forth. We will want to talk about our ISB operating guidelines, and hopefully we might have a slightly modified version there based on what we just approved on the letter, and if we have any more further guidance on on the community, communication and stakeholder engagement stuff, plus putting in the new language. So we'll please read our current operating guidance, and hopefully we'll have a revised version for you to preview prior to our June meeting, and we'll have a discussion of that. That also will require a 2/3 majority vote for us to approve any changes in our operating guideline. And most importantly, we're going to have our chair-elect voting. I should say that in the hour since we last, 2 hours since we last met, we've had 3 or 4 volunteers to be chair-elect. Of course, that's totally a joke. No one has volunteered yet. So please don't forget to do that, and talk to Lisa, I, or Jay about how much time it takes. I forgot to mention that if you do sign up, I believe this is true, Edmund, that your contract will be changed to reflect that, and you will have increased hours added to your contract. So this is really a moneymaker, so make sure you join in and sign up. We're going to have presentations by some of our new people, our 2 postdocs, Christine and Lillian, and our new Sea Grant Fellow, Allegra, will be presenting their material, and then updates on future things. We have planned on day 3 will be the field tour. So on day 3, we're going to go out, and I'm not sure how this is evolving. I have several notes on maybe Edmund can summarize what the latest update is on our field trip.
Yes, so the field trip will focus on the fish salvage facilities. Our current plan is to visit the Skinner Fish Salvage Facility, which is operated by the California Department of Water Resources, and checking out some of the other facilities in the area. Okay. Yes, and we're also going to go to the UC Davis Fish Culture Laboratory during that time. And then for those who want to leave early, that'll be the end of one part of the tour. Then the second half of the tour, we're going to go over to the Tracy Fish Collection Facility and tour that facility. And that one is managed by the United States Bureau of Reclamation. So there's been a lot of interest in what is fish salvage. So the purpose of this tour is to help provide that context, and also in preparation of your future reviews as well. The logistics still might change a little bit, but that's a rough overview of the plan for the tour.
Weren't we at one stage planning to go to some of the water control sites? To Clifton or something?
Do you mean the pumping plants?
Yeah.
So the salvage facilities are in relation to the pumping plants. So we're coordinating an informal, the focus will be on fish salvage, but in the context, you will see like the Things pumping plant and the Jones pumping plant.
Which will help a little bit on orientation, I think, on the EIR.
Yes.
Okay, and then on that's our June trip, and July 14th again will be another conference call. So on the EIR, we should begin to think about getting prepared for this and for this meeting in June and steps beyond. You should have all received a copy of an outline of chapters. You should have also received a copy of our last review, but more importantly, a memo dated April 20th, or April of 2020, I believe, where we, April 17th, 2020, where we talked to DWR about the this particular EIR and we pointed out the reviews we've done in the past, what our general recommendations were in terms of clarity and summarizing ideas and so forth, and what we hoped would be in this EIR. That's I think a 2-page letter or so forth. They responded to us, and that report is in the note you had with respect to Mavis's notebook. There's their particular response to our comments. And then the last thing you have is a draft for discussion that Jay put together to also help us move forward on this. So I don't know that we need to think about assigning chapters yet, but I want you to look at the chapters that are in there. What we've done in the past is we've had all of us review a couple of the chapters, certain chapters that every member reviewed. We can all scan all the chapters, but then some chapters where we have a particular lead Delta scientist have the lead on that chapter topic with at least one other member helping to review and write that. Hopefully 3 members per chapter, but at least 2 with one lead. Sometimes we've had co-leads. And so go through those chapters. I know they're just a chapter title, so there's not a lot of information in there as to what might be entailed in that. You could go back to the water fix thing itself and see the kinds of material that we expect to be in there, the water fix document. But think about those and start signing yourself up mentally, because by the end of June we want to walk away with assignments for chapters, lead assignments and so forth. We do not know how big the report is. We've heard today, I think, through the public comment, it might be 15,000 pages. We have no idea really what the number of pages are. And secondly, when we're going to get it. I don't know a date that's been set yet, but hopefully we'll hear that in June. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay. And Jay, do you want to elaborate a little bit on your email there? And
just a little bit. This is a big task. Whether it's 15,000 pages or 40,000 pages, the magnitude of the task is about the same for us. My understanding is that in the past we were asked to review a combined EIR, EIS. My understanding today is that the EIR will be a separate document from the federal EIS, so the state and federal environmental impact statements will be different, have a little different legislation behind them and the like. The Department of Water Resources is leading the state EIR, and the Corps of Engineers, I understand, is leading the federal EIS. So we might have another federal environmental document to review in addition, depending upon if we want to do it and the like. So my memo is just a short sort of 4-pager on some thoughts of the major findings, the context of this kind of review, what we should be looking for conceptually and in terms of our mission, going through some of the major findings from the previous reviews and how they might still be relevant for some of the authors of the current documents that we haven't seen yet. And then some thoughts on how we might organize the review a little bit for ourselves. So just a little bit of context, and then in the back there's links and short discussions about the enabling legislation and the requirements for EIRs and EISs, links to our past reviews and the like, just as a general reference. So it basically is meant as an orientation for us that might be helpful in our thinking, especially given most of the board members are new, haven't done this thing before. And in my hope that they're delayed by about 2 months in getting this document out, in which case it won't be my problem.
so Edmund, maybe you can answer this question as well. I think in the past we've been given a little bit of guidance, and I'm trying to remember, like with water fix, were we given guidance questions from DWR or from the council? Do you recall what those were? Not what the questions were, but who gave them to us?
For your past reviews, you've gotten guidance from the council for the 2017 one. In the past, it was also one from CDFW and the council jointly.
Okay, so we can look at that past guidance as well, but we have not been given guidance yet that I know of. But as an independent science board, we viewed that as something we definitely want to look at, but we don't feel restricted by that guidance. And we can for sure review whatever we think is important and make whatever comments we think are valuable. And Any questions or Lauren?
Yeah, my understanding is that the council executive leaders are considering providing guiding questions as they have in the past. And I would expect they would probably, if they are going to provide those by your June meeting.
Thanks. Anybody have any thoughts or questions or concerns?
Well, I just have a general question, particularly if this comes after Jay leaves because of his long history of looking at these things. Some elements of this project share similarities with past projects. Some things are new, some things are similar. Would it be helpful to quickly compare elements of the past reviews to see what we already said and whether those were addressed? And okay.
That makes a lot of sense. It might save us a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, and we ought to look at particularly our last two, or was it three? I forget. Major reviews and read through those, because I think there are elements in there that we will want to look at and see whether or not they've been addressed or they're the same thing or whatever. And it also gives you a little bit of a guidance in these documents about the sort of the level of complexity or simplicity that we addressed the review, you know, and so we're not looking at numbers and tables necessarily, and so it gives you some idea of the scope of the comments and the I think that's a valuable thing to look at.
The first of the three reviews we did on the previous environmental reports was the longest review. I think I looked earlier today, and we had 130 pages to our review, but those included several pages on each of the chapters. For the second review we did, it was on a recirculation with some modifications of the first environmental document, EIR, EIS. And so we were able to shorten the focus our comments on the changes and then some overall comments. And so the second review was only 21 pages. So again, it's very useful, I think, to take reviews that we've done in the past and try to carry forward the ideas that from them and see what were addressed and what wasn't. Plus add anything new that we come up with.
Okay, anything else on this topic?
Thank you, Jay, for writing the memo. And the background information is very helpful.
I figure probably not everybody here has reviewed a document like this before, and some orientation might be useful, and as much as can be fitted in just a couple of pages.
Okay, great.
So
go ahead.
if there are any next steps for this memo, I wrote this just to be an informative document for the board members. There's been some discussion that we've had occasionally about should we write a formal letter from us to the authors of the forthcoming EIR, EIS, saying we'd like to see these things in your summaries or whatever. I'm not sure that the timeliness will allow that, but that's something to discuss.
Yeah, and I guess I sort of feel that we kind of did that in that April 2020 letter, where we sent the letter to the Delta Conveyance Scoping, comments, and we specifically, again, highlighted some of the points we had made before, many respects, to talk to them about dealing with adaptive management, the communication, long-term effects, climate change, residents and visitors. So I think.
So I think if we think that's sufficient, which maybe it is, then maybe we just want to send a little note and append that letter saying, oh, by the way, we sent this guidance document to you in April of 2020. We're hoping we see these things in the final. That might be the most expeditious way for the chairship to do this without even having to have us vote on anything and wordsmith anything and disintegrate anything.
Yeah, and we also made some comments during their presentation to us, so they had that feedback as well.
But it might be useful for them to just get a little reminder, oh, by the way, we're here, we're gonna have to review your document, so you might want to pay attention to these few points, because they might have lost something in the last 2 years. I know no one else has, but.
And I would encourage folks to go ahead and reread the Maven's Notebook summary. You know, they did come to us in August, I believe, August of 2020, and responded directly to that that April 2020 memo, and they went through fairly detailed about how they responded to those things. And Maven's Notebook has their slides and their comments relative to a number of the points that we made. They're all specific. Their slides are specifically addressing Delta ISB comments. So I would again review that, and that will help hold their feet to the fire in terms of doing what they said they were going to do in terms of our initial comments back. Any other thoughts? Okay, remember June 8th afternoon, that's when we'll have this conversation. And think carefully about what chapters you want to devote the next 6 months to. I don't know how much time we're going to have, but I think it's only a few months to do this. So.
Hey, Steve, quick logistical question. Do we know what time the field tour will be done on the 10th? So we can start planning our travels?
I think there's two options, Edmund. You have that in front of you?
Yeah, so expected time back would be around 5 p.m. if you want to do the full tour. If you want to come back early, you'll probably be leaving around 12, and with the idea of trying to be back before 2.
Okay. Any comments on this, Adam? Or I mean, Edmund?
There are no public comments.
Okay, I think we still have time now to go back to the missing item that we didn't discuss, which is the outreach and communication of recent reviews. Item number 5 on the original agenda. It's fairly quick and it's more informational, but the idea here is just to summarize any additional outreach and communication we've had of our recently completed reviews. First one, monitoring enterprise review. You've heard we've made a presentation to the council. We plan to also make a presentation to DPIC on July 18th. There's also been a summary sheet prepared that Allegra took the lead on, and that was targeted for council members and DPIC members. So that has been completed, a 2 or 3 page summary sheet. And then we've begun working on a journal article to try and figure out where we take particularly the adaptive management approach to monitoring turn it into a manuscript. We've done some more diving into the literature to make sure we're not recreating the wheel. We have found some other pieces of literature that look somewhat similar, so we're going to be reading those more carefully and trying to pick out what might be most publishable in a peer-reviewed journal. So that's it for monitoring. Any questions on that? Water supply reliability, Jay?
We still don't have the final report out yet. I'm not sure if we have any updates for when that's supposed to be released. Because the previous estimate that I heard was May 9th. So I guess it's not yet. I'm supposed to give we're supposed to have a Quint workshop sometime, probably I guess in the fall. They'll have a presentation and then have some panel discussions about the report and the general subject of water supply reliability estimation. Christine has volunteered to start making a summary sheet for secondary audiences and perhaps university students. And then we'll make one for policymakers as well. I think that's what we'd like to do before we have a presentation before the council and DPIC. So hopefully we don't have a, I guess we have a presentation scheduled for the council in what, June? And
At the 24th.
24th, right? And then hopefully at DPIC also. For both of those, we'll have a one-page sheet. It would be nice to have a journal article summarizing all of this. I was going to volunteer Tom and Joe, but I won't.
Any questions on that? And the last update is the non-native species review. I've begun having a chat with John Weens, who was the sort of the co-lead, if not the lead, on that review. And we had talked about doing a manuscript on this. He's happy to be involved and help work on a manuscript. So he and I will be chatting shortly to try and come up with just trying to recollect what we thought was so important and to publish and see if we can come up with that. And then we have a larger group of folks who will, and I think, trying to remember who it was. I think it's Lisa's involved and is it Christine? Who else? Is one other person?
Virginia, I think.
Virginia. And we'll try and take those ideas and turn them into some ideas for a manuscript and bring it back to the full board for having a look at. And again, in all these cases, you're more than welcome to be a co-author, and you're more than welcome to bow out if you feel you don't want to be. Lisa?
So I'm hearing a lot about manuscripts. So I'm just going back to the recommendations of the Hastings report. I mean, Jay also mentioned panel discussions. I don't know really what all that entails, but all of these reports seem ripe for digging in a bit in terms of, do you understand what we're saying? Can we help you think about ways to implement? You know, is there anything in between a fact sheet and a manuscript that we should be doing?
I think there's some useful blogs that can be written on this subject. That seems a good intermediate length. Quite often, if you want to have people read your reports and read your journal articles, tweets and blogs are very useful to get people's attention and get the main ideas across.
There is some overlap with the water supply reliability and the scenario idea that Tanya and I are working on, just in terms of really exploring uncertainty, certainly with water management. It's kind of the poster child of, yeah. So anyway, you know, there might be some opportunities to link into that work and have some discussions, perhaps. We'll have to see what's feasible.
That sounds great.
Yeah, in some respects, I view the, of course, our presentations to the council and to DPIC and the council's listserv and the presentations we make at IEP workshops and frankly, our reviews themselves get some spread throughout the agencies and policymakers and stakeholders. But frankly, I don't think there's many scientists that listen to any of that stuff. And I think that that is one component of the audience that I think you only really reach effectively is through peer-reviewed publications, because that's what they spend their time reading. So I think that it's another segment of the audience that I think we could spend time on. There are others as well that we don't. We've talked before about the idea is making a list of the audiences and then trying to find the right products that they're going to naturally read and pay attention to. And the other one is the state legislators. And I'm not sure they're listening or reading our reports either. And we have talked about developing some sort of an engagement strategy with them as well. So I think this whole concept of how we engage, I'm hopefully in the community, in the communication and stakeholder engagement strategy we develop, we'll list those kinds of audiences, the various kinds of audiences, and what's some of the processes we can use to reach them. And make sure we do get that breadth of coverage.
Yeah, I would just add to that, we probably just want some sort of filtering process by which we think about which of our messages are really legislature relevant and ready, because they're not going to be interested in things that are too speculative or, for them to act on. So anyway, just we need some process where we highlight the ones we think really should go up to the legislature.
Okay, any other thoughts on this topic? Any public comment, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay, so I guess we move to item number 10, which is, I believe it's Edmund's summary of action items.
Yeah, so our first follow-up item is we're hoping to have an election of a new chair-elect in June. So if you have any questions about the position, feel free to contact anyone on the chairship, or if you want to be nominated or plan to make a nomination, please let the chairship know. In terms of future reviews, so Science Reversal is still in the process of drafting a prospectus. Food Webs is still in the process of planning a workshop, and a follow-up item I have for that is there may be some discussions with Laurel Larsen on the collaboratory idea because of some potential linkages there. For hydrodynamic and water quality modeling, Joe Fernando had a look at the recent work of the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee, and at this stage, he thinks the review idea of hydrodynamic and water quality modeling could be placed on hold. But as an idea, he thinks it'll be useful to invite the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee to a future Delta ISB meeting to provide an update on what they're working on. Some other review items that are still on the table include environmental flow / future conditions, and also climate change forecasting and scenario development science review. There are current talks to potentially merge those ideas, and we'll have a more formal update at the next meeting. Any questions or comments related to this item? For the science needs assessment, Dr. Lund is preparing an early draft that will be submitted to a subset of members, so keep a lookout on that. In terms of an action item today, you guys took action on the draft response to the Delta Science Program's assessment of the Delta ISB. The motion was made by Jay with a second from Virginia to accept the letter and have Steve and Lisa make some minor changes based off the discussion. The motion was passed. All members voted yes, except for Joe. You weren't documented for the roll call vote. Any questions about that? In terms of the preparation for the June meeting, please review the operating guidelines beforehand. There will be a discussion on modifying the operating guidelines. Prior to the meeting, the chairship will be sending out some potential revisions to the operating guidelines. For the June meeting, we have DWR returning to Delta ISB meeting to provide an update on Delta Conveyance Project Environmental Impact Report. Prior to that meeting, it'll be useful to take a look at the list of chapter titles that were part of your meeting package and start thinking about which chapters you may potentially be interested in reading, as well as reading the past reviews on California water fix, and also the notice of preparation comment letters to help with your review and seeing what ideas from the past you might be able to take to move forward. In terms of your outreach and communication, currently for monitoring and for non-native species, there's talks of preparing a scientific manuscript for publication for water supply reliability review. The report is still being finalized and formatted with the idea that there might be a post-review workshop with PLEM in the fall. Anything to add to the list of follow-up items?
And if not, this concludes my report.
Thanks, Edmund. Excellent job again. And we move on to any public comments for matters not on the agenda.
There are no additional public comments for this meeting.
Thanks, Edmund. Any other thoughts people have before we adjourn? Okay, not seeing any. So thanks, everyone, and thanks for putting up with the half day kind of schedule. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in June. Take care.